Black people, we've got to fight. Jean Petro, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, Black people, we've got to fight. Zumbi, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, Black people, we've got to fight. Yes, Santa, why you see us? Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, Black people, we've got to fight. Bookman, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh,
we have to have the courage to construct our own reality. And that's what Garvey was talking about. Because he said he looked around, he didn't see what he thought should be there, and so what did he do? He didn't get depressed about it. He didn't get defeated about it. He said, I'm gonna build the government that we need to have. Ooh, where do you get that kind of boldness from? So we gotta go all the way back to Garvey, who said he would come again. He said he would be here with us, no matter how long it took. And I'm telling you that the way he comes back is in our work. Not honoring him in words, pomp and all of that stuff, but honoring him through doing what he did. How many of us have the courage to do that? The man took on the world for us and in our name. And then we come to Sodai. And in this presentation of the paradigm, I'm going to make this like what it is we want to reach. So Sodai is translated clear word in Dogana language. And I use it to mean that here we gain understanding. This is sight with understanding. And it is seeing beyond what just we think we see with this physical thing. It's seeing beyond that. And so we gain vision, because that's what vision is. With vision, you've got to be able to use the imagination informed by the African spirit. And Brother Amos, who I work very closely with, was a good friend of mine. He taught me, and he would talk about imagination. Image a nation. Do you see? But that's got to be part of vision. To be a visionary, you got to see beyond this box here. You got to see beyond the ma'afa. You got to see what is it that our people rightfully should have, and that's what Garvey did. Garvey had a vision.
New transition. Greetings, this is Shakara, and it's been an honor serving you as director of Got Kush TV. Over the past few years, we've brought you the pilot of the Black Root Economic Show, many seasons of Wordsmith, The Insight, and the ever popular Decipher. We have covered community events and even hosted a few of our own, including Blacktricity, as a part of the official Ghana Beyond the Return roster. We also kept you company throughout lockdown with the Quarantine Convo. After a brief hiatus, we came back with our regular weekly interactive live show, Zivanai, keeping you up to date with current events around the Black world, from UK to Senegal to Haiti and beyond. It is our aim to continue to develop as a premier Black media institution, and for that reason, we have a special announcement. Introducing Kimbunga Media. Between the 10th of June and the 17th of Mosiah, August, we will be transitioning to a new name and institution, Kimbunga Media. In the beautiful Kiswahili language, Kimbunga means whirlwind.
Look for me in a whirlwind or a storm. Look for me all around you. For with God's grace, I shall come back with countless millions of black men and women who have died in America, those who have died in the West Indies, and those who have died in Africa, to aid you in the fight for liberty, freedom, and life.
Our name symbolizes our aim to take the media landscape by storm, developing high quality, impactful, geopolitical and cultural content aimed at empowering African people, bringing knowledge, information, inspiration and analysis from an unapologetically Pan-African, universal African nationalist and African-centered perspective. So, what can you expect? We are gradually developing a full spectrum of flagship shows and presenters, but in the immediate right here now, over the next couple of years, we have two major aims in bringing you our flagship shows. One, the return of Kush Communiversity, bringing you high-level scholarship in all areas of people activity, featuring luminaries from across the Black world. And two, the production of the full first season of the new and improved Ujamaa Black Group Economic Show. While we encourage you to develop and support Black businesses, this show aims to raise our awareness of the political economy of today's world and popularize new solution paradigms in political economy among African people. Alongside all this, we will continue to bring you Zivanai, Jaleba, the Afrocentric perspective, All Eyes on Africa, Ghana, Democracy Under Fire, the Revolutionary Minds team with that artistic, ancestral energy, and as things grow and develop, there'll be plenty more. We also have plans to host live events and film screenings, so stay tuned for more information on that. So what can you do? Continue to support us by watching, liking, sharing and commenting on our content. Be sure to follow us on all social media, and if you are so moved, join our Patreon community. We'll be sharing flagship shows exclusively with our Patreon community before general release, and granting you discounts to events and future screenings. Right now, if you become a Patreon, you will have access to the pilot for the Black Group Economic Show and all installments of last year's Black History Month series, Sankofa, The Future of Black History. At some point, we'll be engaging in community crowdfunding towards the production of the new and improved Ujamaa Black Group Economic Show, complete with offerings and perks for those who choose to invest in us. Look out for the launch, and we thank you in advance for your support. Any questions, feel free to hit us up in the comment section and we'll be sure to address. We look forward to you joining us for this new phase of our development. Stay tuned as we bring you Kimbunga Media. Tendai Mwadi, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai Muzimu Mukuru, we give praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodie, African power and African liberation for all African people. Greetings and welcome, brothers and sisters, to this very, very special conversation that we are going to be having today. And it is concerning the topic of Juneteenth, Martin's Rebellion, and Black resistance. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters. Juneteenth, Martin's Rebellion, and Black resistance. Our special guest is waiting in the wings. I'm going to bring him through shortly. Before I do so, let me remind you all to please hit up the like, brothers and sisters, as you come through. Hit up the like and share the video far and wide, brothers and sisters. Share the video and like the video, brothers and sisters, as we introduce this topic to you. We want to send a special shout out to all those who have taken the time to comment in the chat. Bigging up Set Imhotep over there in Trinidad. Why is the Dome TV is in the building? If you are not subscribed to Why is the Dome TV, subscribe to Why is the Dome TV. In fact, I'm going to say this from now. My brother Rakim Shabazz, I'll be interested, to hear your thoughts on this topic. So, as and where we share the link, I would humbly request that you click it to interact with our brother Mansa Foday this evening. I would most appreciate hearing your perspective on this topic. All right, Jadorian in the building, Jadorian Chimurenga in the building, brothers and sisters, and we want to big up all those who are viewing and haven't made themselves known from wherever you are watching in the world today. This show, however, brothers and sisters, is we specially welcome our brothers and sisters who are Africans from across the waters. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters, Africans from the United States of America, because our show today specifically pertains to the history and the sojourn of Africans who reside and are domiciled and whose ancestors were enslaved, principally in what is today referred to as the United States of America. And so we're going to be uncovering some hidden history, some history that is not necessarily most well known, but it's history that is hidden in history that is very, very well known. And that history is the context of the so-called Civil War in the United States of America. And we have many, many narratives concerning the Civil War and what happened in the post-Civil War era. And much of that history is designed specifically to hypervalorize and aggrandize the state project of the United States of America in its formation, and particularly in relation to this history, the works and deeds of one Abraham Lincoln. Good old Abe, who never told a lie, brothers and sisters. And so the activities, and I have some familiarity with this, and I'll explain why I have some familiarity with this dynamic in a second. But the exploits and the works and deeds of our ancestors, are often, and I'm saying our ancestors, brothers and sisters, because I recognize that my ancestors are also from and in the United States of America, brothers and sisters, So we're saying our ancestors, there's a collective we, all right? Ubuntu vibration. Our ancestors who were soldiers in the Civil War, much of their story is yet to be told. And so today, brothers and sisters, we're going to bring through Mansa Foday Ajamu Mansare, who is the founder of the Black Star Action Network International, who is one of the high commissioners of the UNIA-ACL-RC 2020 of the West African region, brothers and sisters. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters, organizing the branches of the UNIA-ACL-RC 2020 in West Africa. He is a hard-working African, a boots-on-the-ground African, and as is demonstrated in the piece that he has written, which we're going to be getting into today, a historian, brothers and sisters. This is a man that can tell you about history from hundreds of years ago and talk and don't stop talk for a half hour. Just running down the history. Seriously knowledgeable brother, well read, well researched, and well committed to the liberation of African people. Brothers and sisters, I introduce to you the one and only Mansa Foday Ajamu. Greetings and welcome, Mansa Foday.
Peace, comrade. How you doing, man? How you doing, Shakara?
My brother, I cannot complain. It's good to see you, good to hear you, and good to host you on Got Kush TV, soon to be Kimbunga Media today, my brother. Give thanks. Right. For those who are not aware, yes, indeed. Chief Foday actually resides in Freetown, Sierra Leone. Yeah. And so maybe we'll touch on that today, but we're going to be getting into not just history, brothers and sisters, but history that is in fact personal to Mansa Foday. Yeah, because we're going to be talking about one of his direct ancestors, his great grandfather, to be specific. Now, I'm going to get into this in a second, but for now, I want you to understand that Mansa Foday has written an article, a piece called Martin's Rebellion, a story of Black resistance in the Union Army. Martin's Rebellion, a story of Black resistance in the Union Army. Yeah. And so you can find the link to that piece in the description to this video. And I encourage you, all of you, to go check it out. Yeah, it's a very, very important story, a very powerful story, and one that is told around Mansa Foday's search to discover and find his own ancestors, brothers and sisters. Yeah, but we're gonna get into the piece in a second, Chief Foday. Because we're hosting this show, however, in line with Juneteenth, yeah, and you align your writing with the subject of Juneteenth in the piece as well. And I believe that many brothers and sisters watching may not have a proper grasp, yeah, of exactly what is Juneteenth. Yeah, Juneteenth was something that I knew about kind of growing up, but it seemed to be, for the most part, a relatively small ceremony that mostly brothers and sisters in the southern states, yeah, observed. And then I learned a little bit later on that for those brothers and sisters who are in Texas, Juneteenth is a Texan thing. Yeah? it's actually very much a Texan thing that spread out, yeah, to other brothers and sisters across the United States of America. And now, as of a couple years ago, it's been made a national holiday, in the United States of America. So for those brothers and sisters, yeah, so that we can contextualize the conversation. For those brothers and sisters who are not aware of what Juneteenth is, could you explain exactly what it is and where it comes from?
Yes, absolutely. I'll try my best in the simplest terms. Mm-hmm. I hope that I'm coming across, because it seems like I'm having some technical difficulties on my end, but you might be getting me clear.
We're getting you clear. Sorry, brother, we're getting you clear. Okay. If there are any issues, I will let you know.
All right, thank you very much. So yeah, absolutely, Chakra, man. Juneteenth, of course, is a play on the word of June 19th. For those who don't know that, Black American culture likes to create new things, especially slang words and extended words, bring two together, put it into one. And Juneteenth is an example of that. So it's cultural even in that sense, just to start that. It's something that belongs to us culturally, even in the name itself. To say Juneteenth is something that we would say. It's something that we created. It's nothing that the American system or anyone else recognized or had any understanding of, other than probably even at the time, those folks in Texas. That's probably why the people are claiming it, because all of these events and commemorations have places where they began. And Juneteenth marks the day, the time where the last Africans received the word from Lincoln of their emancipation. And it was people in Texas was the last horizon. And so it happened in 1865. Now, to give you some context to it, on April 14th, Abraham Lincoln was shot, and he died the next morning, April 15th. So June 19th that same year, meaning a few months later, in the aftermath of Lincoln's assassination, at the end of the Civil War, Lincoln was actually assassinated about 5 or 6 days after General Lee, who was leading the army against the Potomac, leading the army against the Union. He surrendered. He surrendered in Virginia. Once he surrendered, the military part of the war was basically over.
Oh, yeah.
And then Lincoln was assassinated. And then in the aftermath, it was a big shakeup. People didn't know if they were going to be free, how it was going to be, but also the fighting continued. And when it reached Texas, and the last people were able to get the word that, hey, man, you set free from the Union soldiers, it was on the day of June 19th. Now, if I was formerly enslaved and living in Charleston, South Carolina, I may not have known nothing about Juneteenth in Texas at that time.
Right.
And so this is something that had to do with local history being preserved. It had to do with people who had exact families connected to that experience, preserving it first among themselves. And today it's a national holiday that the United States has grabbed onto. It's similar to Malcolm X Day. People were already Martin Luther King Day. People were already commemorating it before it finally became a national holiday. And then you have, even now, people are fighting for Malcolm X's birthday to be recognized and things like this. Of course, in the sector of the movement that we come from, we say, no, we keep that for ourselves. These are sacred.
Yes,
these are our own. And we shouldn't, water them down. But there is a monumental truth, because even after June 19th, 1865, those people still were not free. They were being locked into a new system of bondage, which would come out to be sharecroppage. It means that now, instead of being chattel, they would now have so-called, quote unquote, rights to enter labor contracts. And then they would just be enslaved again through the labor contracts, and segregated. So, they just re-enslaved us at that time. Juneteenth is not a mockery. It does signify a moment in history that was pivotal, because after the end of the Civil War, we didn't go back into that form of servitude, that form of enslavement. Chattel slavery was ended at that point in the United States of America in terms of being formal. But just like the illegal, just like the transatlantic slave trade, even when they banned it in 1808, it continued. Slavery by another name also continued. So I just want to put that out there as well while we commemorate Juneteenth. That is our day. And if it happened to one African, it happened to all Africans. All Africans are welcome to join us in this commemoration. We don't know the origins of those Africans. They could have come from several regions of Africa originally, that begin to commemorate that day together. This could be a Pan-African thing if we look at it bioculturally. If we look at it as Garveyites, this could be any of us. And so we all embrace it, just like we do other African days that are very important, that signify victories in our struggle. So, I love Juneteenth. It's not something that I grew up knowing about much because I'm from Pennsylvania. We didn't hear too much about Juneteenth over there. Just like in the normal atmosphere, there wasn't no cookouts and nobody wasn't commemorating or nothing like that. I've seen video and heard from cats in Texas and even Louisiana, and they turn up. They've been turning up for decades.
I know what you're talking about. I've seen those videos as well, and it definitely appears to me to be the case that it was a much bigger thing in the South, than it was in the North, and now it seems to have become a real massive thing. Having said that, though, my brother, like a lot of the law associated with Juneteenth, and you kind of alluded to this already, but let me just address this, because a lot of people will put it out there that basically it's associated with the fact that not all of the Africans who, were supposedly freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, as you've alluded to, got the message at the same time. And so the idea is that many Africans were still being enslaved, even in the formal sense, for a while afterwards. And I know that there are some people who challenge some of that narrative to varying different degrees. To what extent is that the case? Is Juneteenth really, concerning Africans basically not really being informed, quote unquote, of their freedom? Is that reality, or is that mythology?
Well, I'll tell you this. There's a few things to look at. The Emancipation Proclamation was made and came into effect January 1st, but it was 1863. So we're talking about June 19th, 1865, being Juneteenth. A lot took place in between that. So because of the Emancipation Proclamation, all of the enslaved Africans that belonged to people who were up in arms against the United States in the South were to be emancipated. It was just a proclamation. It really didn't have no power, but it could be militarily enforced. So it was a military strategy. So as the military would defeat the Confederates, they would implement the Emancipation Proclamation locally. They would get all the blacks together, you know, and tell them they're free, and you know, and then they would negotiate the contracts between them and the same white folks. So you know, this is what was happening. Right. It was a change in economic system more than anything, but we don't understand it like that. It took us out of chattel slavery and put us into wage slavery or sharecrop slavery. It took us out of one form into another. And but in that process, there was an Emancipation Proclamation. And that proclamation was strategic at the time in the war because the Confederates, who was the rebels in the war, so to speak, those who were pro-slavery, they were already using enslaved Africans as forced labor in the war. They were already putting Africans in military capacity, and so the African community at the time, mind you, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free anyone in the North because, of course, you had no slave states in the North. You understand, right? So it was only for those in the South, only for those in the southern states, and that's where the war was being fought to put down the rebellion. And so when you look at that, and you understand that, okay, by June 19th, 1865, the war was already militarily over. Lee had surrendered April 9th. So Lincoln had been assassinated April 15th. So this is months later after that. We're already in what they call Reconstruction at the point of Juneteenth. So I want to place it into the proper perspective for everyone out there, that it's not just one big war happening. The war is over now by Juneteenth. And they're already in Reconstruction. So actually, Juneteenth happened during the early days of Reconstruction. They're already post-war. The last guns have already been shot. And now those people had never even heard of the Emancipation Proclamation. They were so far away from the fighting. And so allegedly, they were the people who last received the word that they were no longer chattel slaves. But I guarantee they became sharecroppers.
Yep. Very important history. And just to point out, I encourage brothers and sisters who have not read the Emancipation Proclamation to actually read the Emancipation Proclamation, because it becomes very, very clear that, as Mansa Foday has outlined, it was a military strategy. And that is made even clearer by the fact that Abe, good old Abe, who never told a lie, was actually concerned with, quote unquote, freeing the quote unquote slaves within the states who had seceded from the Union. So this was not a universal declaration of liberation for all of the enslaved Africans in the southern states. It was specifically about those states who had rejected and broken away from the United States of America to form the Confederacy, and those who were in states who had not broken away from the Union, whereby African enslavement was still a thing, those enslaved Africans would remain enslaved. So we have to understand that very, very clearly. All right. And so finally, just as an introductory question, Chief Foday, I see some debate sometimes among my brothers and sisters in the United States of America about the extent to which they believe we or you or us should be celebrating Juneteenth. Why is there a question among some brothers and sisters about whether Juneteenth is something to celebrate?
Well, I think it touches on the fact that the oppression continued. The fact that the system just changed, but it wasn't transformed. That even today we still question if we're free. So just like now, people, every time there's a country in Africa's independence, the whole country questions independence. What is it? Are we really independent? Look at our conditions. It happens here every year. Every April 27th, they go through the same thing in their heads. So Juneteenth has been painted to us like an Independence Day for Black Americans. Like that's when we finally was free. That's when the shackles finally was broke. And so there's those of us who have a better political consciousness than that. We have we know history better than to understand that we're still not free. We can't take Juneteenth too far. And so, but for me personally, brother, honestly, I believe that the Africans in the United States of America are a nation, no different than Jamaicans, no different than the Africans in Haiti or even Kenya or Azania or wherever we're talking about, Congo, right? That we have a sense of nationality, those of us who were enslaved in the United States of America, that we that we share among ourselves.
Yes, sir.
And just like any other nation, we're not a big one-way kind of people. You know, you can't just stereotype the whole nation.
Of course.
So we always had internal political differences. And I believe that Juneteenth strikes that chord because on one side, you have those who will take it too far with the celebration in terms of declaring that that's when we were free and that we're still free and it's over and that's when slavery was ended. And then they neglect the whole 100 years of sharecropping and lynching and great migration and, you know, Red Summer, and they forget all about all of that other stuff. And so we just got to be clear that just because we commemorate that date, you know, to highlight that it happened, that it's not a signification that our ancestors became free at that moment. We have to be able to explain it. We have to be able to explain it. So me, I love it, man, to tell you the truth. You know, when I was younger, I was a little more radical, man. I was more into political activism. I want the Rage Against the Machine and just burn it down. I was ready to fight. And but the older I get, the more I understand that it's a deeper fight that we're fighting. We're not just fighting physical. There's a need for us to reconstruct our culture. And the reconstruction of our culture, it can't happen without reclaiming our history and reclaiming our narratives and commemorating our ancestry. And so I believe Juneteenth gives us the opportunity to commemorate our ancestry. It has a family reunion feel to it. It's an opportunity for Africans to have a day off now because it's a national holiday.
Absolutely.
And things like that. But we got to be careful to not be economically exploited as we celebrate. If you're commemorating Juneteenth and you got to buy things, don't support the same people that had our people enslaved. Support Black people. Support ourselves. I like the idea of the original first Juneteenth. Just imagining what they were like. They had to be so communal, so family oriented. They had to be so local, you know. And I would like to have that feel to it. You know, we go out in the countryside somewhere, man. You know, we go to a ancestral cemetery or something like that, man. We do some community work during that day, not like a celebration, like you know, that we were set free that day. But that I think Juneteenth is a day of reflection. We should really do some serious libations on that day. You know, that day didn't come about easily. And that's why I think we should commemorate it. There was 200,000 Africans who ended up fighting within the Union Army towards Juneteenth. And I think that they don't get enough recognition. And I don't think that they don't get these stories are untold. So we have great warriors like the one we're going to talk about today.
Yes, sir.
That are largely unknown. And so the value of Juneteenth is also, I believe, a commemoration to the United States colored troops. Those 200,000 soldiers and their families who rebelled and fought and jubilated and did whatever they had to do to make sure that they didn't go back into bondage. That Emancipation Proclamation carried weight at the time. Today we laugh at it, but then it carried heavy weight. You know, and we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about it more because it became a military struggle and not just a political conversation when it became war. And when it becomes war, that's what it is. And that's the time we're living in. So I want us to be focused on it because all around us is war. Right now, the United States, they just passed the act the other day in the House of Representatives to bring back the military draft for people between 8 years, 18 and 36. So they're about to bring back the military, the 26, the mandatory military draft in the United States within the next year. Because you know why? Because they understand that American imperialism is at war. It doesn't exist without war, but they're ratcheting it up and they're ready to feed the machine more of us. You understand? So we got to get ready. We need to be reflecting on this because they've been using our ancestors in the United States of America for the last 200, 300 years to fight wars that have been imperialist wars. And if you look at what our ancestors just fought for recently and our elders fought for recently in the 60s and the 70s in that war, in that draft during Vietnam War. You know, it's just showing you that we're going back to a draconian system. We're going backwards politically in the world. That white supremacy is consolidating itself and trying to survive. So we're at war.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have to understand these things. All right, Chief, for the give thanks for that background there. Very important, brothers and sisters. If you're just joining us, we're speaking to Mansa Foday Ajamu, who currently resides in Freetown, Sierra Leone. But I must also say that his family, whilst he already mentioned he grew up in Philadelphia, Mansa Foday's family is Gullah Geechee, brothers and sisters, from the Carolinas. And so the history that we're going to get into today is very much wrapped up in that history and the people, our Gullah Geechee people over there in what is now today called the United States of America. We're speaking to Mansa Foday because he has recently written and published a piece called Martin's Rebellion, a story of Black resistance in the Union Army. A story of Black resistance in the Union Army. And for those who may not be aware, the Union Army are those basically the Union refers to the Union of the United States of America. And during the Civil War, you had the North versus the South, effectively. And so the Union Army would have been the army that was representing the North, and that was versus the Confederacy, the army that was representing the South, who was trying to break away from the North. And so, as Mansa Foday has said, this was wrapped up in terms of in the history of the anti-slavery movement and Africans resisting enslavement. And for those of us who are from the Caribbean, for those of us who are from the Caribbean, I want to draw a very quick parallel before I get into the story that Mansa Foday is here to tell. And that is the fact that many of our ancestors, during enslavement and during colonialism that followed enslavement, fought on behalf of the British and on behalf of the French, and so on, and in doing so, fought for the sake of earning greater rights, greater rights on the part of those who were enslaving and colonizing us, and so the idea being that once we demonstrate service and capacity to fight, that we will reap benefits, from this in terms of how our status and our autonomy in the nations in which we are colonized. Mansa Foday's internet appears to have failed him, so we are going to just wait for him to return. I believe he's here, and so I'm drawing that parallel just to highlight that our ancestors employed various different strategies, in pursuit of freedom and liberation. And sometimes we may not fully understand, the strategies that they employed. But in order to understand them, we have to understand the context of the time and the options that were available to our ancestors at that time. And only from that perspective can we truly, form relevant and productive judgments of their thoughts, their deeds, and their actions. And so we're going to engage in that today, brothers and sisters. And I want brothers and sisters who are from the Caribbean to understand that we have some similar stories. Many of my grandparents and great granduncles fought in the, you know, in the West Indian Regiment, yeah, and all of these things. And some of you, your ancestors fought in the West African Regiment, yeah, on behalf of the UK. And so, but the reasons why our ancestors did these things, there are many varying different motivations and intentions. And so we're going to get in this today. Mansa Foday, please inform us, yeah, who is John Martin?
Yes, sir. Let's get into that. So, John Martin is a man that I never knew existed. In 2005, just to give you some pretext, in 2005, my family on my mother's side, we had a reunion, and I wasn't able to go, but my mother went, and it was in Charleston, South Carolina. They got together and they had some elders there that was, you know, almost 100 years old. They was just talking stories and telling stories. And it came up that one of our ancestors, who basically we all descend from, that he was in the military during the Civil War. And that he changed his name after the war. And it was kind of like left right there. Right. Okay, his name is this. We're the descendants of the name changer, but we don't know what the original name is. All we know is that he was in the Civil War, and that there was also a story that he was kidnapped prior to the Civil War, and he ended up being a cowboy, basically manning the beast for the Confederates until 1865. Now I understand. So for most of the war, he was used as a cowboy by the Confederates, right? And in South Carolina, and so he was freed by an act that is that this whole pamphlet is built around, which is Sherman's marches, Tecumseh Sherman's marches. But just to answer that a little better, John Martin was the alias of my ancestor while he fought, while he was in the Union Army. So he went from being an enslaved person who was taken to the Confederates camp to man the beast while they went out and fought to keep him permanently enslaved, to being rescued by the Union Army, to following the Union Army and ultimately becoming a Union soldier. But when he became a soldier, the name that he fought under was Private John Martin. When he got out of the military, he changed his name to Charles McClellan. Right. So this was the Charles McClellan descendant reunion that we learned about this. And my mother came back and told me the story in 2005. I was flabbergasted. I was like, what? Because by that time I had a consciousness. By that time I'm already politically active. And I had no idea to think, do I have an ancestor anywhere near the Civil War? I had kind of looked at the Civil War like, you know, okay, that happened. I didn't really give it too much context, but knowing that I had an ancestor now that was connected to that, it made me more interested in it. And so over the years, that ancestor spirit has just been on me. Dig me up, find my truth, tell my story. And so every time I turn around, I'm finding more information on him, sometimes just on accident. And so for those who don't know, I'm also a genealogist. I've done my family tree back to the mid to late 1700s. I can call ancestors and straight lineage back on multiple branches of my ancestry. Right. I even know where some of them came from. I have 3 who I can pinpoint were Kunta Kintes, basically first arrivals in documentation. I'm not talking I can show you the documents. Right. So, so I became ultimately very interested in knowing and cracking and solving this issue, because I realized that when I would ask the elders, well, what was his name prior? Nobody could tell me. And it was almost like a debate. My mother was saying one thing, my cousins were saying another thing. And I'm like, man, I need to know. And I dug and dug and dug. So a few years ago, I looked for Charles McClellan under an alias with one of the surnames that my family believed he had. And I found someone by that name. I found someone who was a Union soldier that fought in Virginia by that name. And for years, I thought he was the right ancestor. But 3 years ago, I discovered a document and that was connected to my exact ancestor.
Right.
Exactly. Reedville, South Carolina. It was after the war. They was doing a special census only for the veterans and their widows. And he was counted. He was counted as a veteran on one of their censuses. This was like 1880. And from there, it had the name Charles McClellan that we know, but it also had his alias, John Martin. And then alongside it had his regiment, it had his company and everything. So now I'm able to go and find out more about this ancestor. Because now I know the name that he fought in the military under. I dug in more. I found out his regiment, the 128th USCT colored troops, that they were a name-changing regiment. That they had, that there's a whole book written on them. I have it right here. There's a whole book. There's a whole book written on them. You can see that. It says borrow identity. These Africans joined the Union Army under aliases, and then when they got out the army, they changed their names.
My brother, not to interrupt you, my brother, because I was interested in this dynamic, and to read a section from the piece that you wrote. You mentioned the book. You said, I found a book titled Borrowed Identity, 128th United States Colored Troops, multiple name usage by Black civilian war veterans who served in the Union regiments organized in South Carolina. Compiled and edited by John R. Gordon, and got my hands on a copy. This book is a mind-blowing compilation containing 76 genealogical and biographical entries from the pension records of colored troops that served in the regiment, the same regiment as my ancestor. Now, the title of the book interests me, this borrowed identity concept. Why did so many of our ancestors enter the Union Army under aliases? What was the purpose of that?
Well, it was because they didn't have surnames as enslaved Africans. We're talking about South Carolina, a state that had the majority African population since early 1700s, all the way up until the early 1900s. Until the Great Migration, South Carolina was a little Africa. And so the reason why they did that was many reasons. When they was being put into the military or drafted into the fighting forces, a lot of them didn't know what to say when they asked for a last name. So a lot of them gave their enslaved name or said it the best way they could, and then also I think that some of the recruiting guys that put them into the military was just giving them surnames, giving them names. There's speculation about even if it was voluntary conscription. At some points, if people weren't being forced into
the army,
be soldiers, and so there's a lot of reasons why people would have done it, but the most common reason was they would take the name of who enslaved their family or who had them enslaved, and they would say their first name or whatever name they was given, and then they'll give that last name to it. So a lot of this surnameage came from that. So some people didn't get emancipated from the Emancipation Proclamation and then get surnames. They had to carry a surname in the army. You understand? You couldn't be just a first name in the military. So that's why. And I believe that played a big role in South Carolina. But what I read in the book is that after the war, the reason why a lot of people took different names was because by the time they connected back with their families for whatever reason had taken on a common name different than the name that they had served under. So they would leave the name that they served under and just adopt the name of their family and move forward. So you'll see them on the census as Jones in 1880, and then by 1900 they're a whole other name because the family changed the name as a whole. And
absolutely,
they did that for many different reasons.
Yes. No, that's very interesting. Just to draw a parallel, we know that oftentimes names also change depending on which European presume themselves master. I remember going to Jamaica and meeting a man whose surname was Bowen. And we concluded that we either could be related or our ancestors shared a plantation, because the story is that one of my ancestors was called Bowen, referred to as Bowen, until he was sold to another enslaver called Walker. And so that's how my family we're known as the Walker clan in Jamaica. And that's simply because one of my ancestors was sold to a man called Walker, yeah. And so names are very superfluous, yeah. And so and as you're saying, sometimes after what they call emancipation, people change their name for various different reasons. So it's just a very interesting story.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering that question.
You know, in South, in the part of South Carolina where my family is from, the Orangeburg District, what I found through my research is that a lot of them took the name not of their immediate enslaver, but they would go back to the very one who owned the first ancestor that they could remember. Right. They would say, okay, well, the first people who enslaved my family was this name, and they would say, well, you know, Johnson may have been my slave master, but my great grandma was enslaved by Walker, so we're all going to take Walker. Right. So we're all descendants of her.
Yeah.
You understand?
Interesting. You know what I don't want to miss though, Chief, for them before we go any further, because we're going to get into the story in terms of the inventory and what happened here. But I think it would be important for us to put South Carolina into perspective, for the viewers, and the Gullah Geechee people in South Carolina, because for many people, it's like this is like a different world, to the rest of the United States of America. So to just give our people an understanding of the unique history of South Carolina as it relates to the rest of the United States.
Okay, absolutely. Well, the first thing that I have to say about South Carolina is that it is the state that was first colonized by Europeans, or attempted. The Spanish back in the early 1500s, long before British even got into the transatlantic anything, they were still in Britain somewhere. The Spaniards were here already. And so in 1526, they attempted the first colony in a location in South Carolina near Georgetown County, right there in the Gullah Geechee corridor. And what happened was that in this attempt of them to establish a Spanish colony, they had brought 100 Africans, according to their records, with them from Hispaniola, which is, of course, Haiti and Dominican Republic. Yes. So their voyage, the colonizers left from there, and they came up the coast of Florida and came up into South Carolina, and they said this is perfect to make the colony, and they settled down. And when they did, I believe it took about 2 months and a few weeks, and there was an uprising. The Africans who they had brought rebelled, and the Native American people as well, the indigenous people, they also resisted as well. So this is the first act of enslaved Africans and anti-colonial indigenous fighters rumbling against Europeans together in North American history. That happened in South Carolina in the year 1526. So when we say 1619, they're hiding something. They're hiding 1526 from us. They got us looking at Virginia, so we don't know what happened in Carolina. And so, and the reality is that, let me tell you this part of it. They had, before they came to do the colony, they sent out scouts. They sent scouts out a few years before, just to go up the coast and see what's there. And they were grabbing the indigenous people at that time and taking them back to Hispaniola. Well, they grabbed one guy who they thought was pretty intelligent, and they even took him to Spain. And when he went to Spain, he told the king and everybody over there, he said, man, I can take you to the riches. I can show you the way. And they brought him back. And he's the one who chose South Carolina as the place, because that's where they took him from. And then as soon as they docked, they say he escaped. He ran off into the bush. And within 2 weeks, within 2 months, the colony was no more. And what stopped it? What destroyed that colony was African and indigenous resistance against white colonialism in North America, and that happened in South Carolina. So that's where I start South Carolina history at for us African people.
Right.
Our history in South Carolina begins with an act of rebellion against the Spanish. Our existence in South Carolina begins with an act of anti-colonialism. It begins with an alliance with the indigenous people that went all the way up until what they call the Seminole Wars. We call it the Gullah Wars. You know, and so all of that began back then, and it took some time before the Spanish came back and tried it again. So we don't really know what happened to those first 100 lineage. We don't know what happened to them, but we do know that it happened, and that they didn't leave with the Spaniards. The Spaniards fled back to Hispaniola and left the Africans behind, and we don't know what happened to the Africans. But what we do know is that is the first existence of Africans, not only in South Carolina, but in recorded North American history. And so that's very, very important. Secondly, later on, the French came through. They tried to settle there. They couldn't. The Spanish tried to settle there. They had it the longest, but then ultimately the British began coming over there, South Carolina, in 1670. In 1670, they established Charleston. So Charleston is the first settlement in South Carolina. And Charleston is the main port city in that whole region historically. Charleston is the main port. 40 to 60% of the Africans who entered the United States entered through the port of Charleston. The Europeans who came and settled South Carolina were different than those who settled Virginia, for instance. Or Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was established by William Penn, a Quaker. It was given to him as a gift by the king. Virginia was established by a company, by the Virginia Company. But South Carolina was established at the request of Europeans who had long established the system of slavery in the island of Barbados. So the Barbadians or Bajans, the white people from there, they wanted to have a mainland colony so they could have more land to do more slavery, because Barbados only had so much land and they had already consumed it all. They needed more land. And so they were given it as a gift for being loyal to the king. And then they got over there and Charleston became, of course, named in honor, of course, of King Charles. So Charlestown. It was Charlestown at first. It wasn't Charleston. It was Charlestown. And so by 1707, South Carolina had an African majority. From 1670 to 1707, African majority. Around that same time, they was discovering the cash crop that would build the colony. You know, in Barbados it was sugar, but in South Carolina it became rice, indigo, and cotton. And so those were the three main crops. But cotton wasn't the first main crop; it was rice. In the 1700s, rice was dominant, and so they started to attach. They started to bring Africans, particularly from rice-growing regions of Africa, Upper Guinea Coast, spanning from Senegal down to about Liberia. They started to really target this area, and so by 1750, the largest slave factory on the west coast of Africa within that region was here in Sierra Leone, called Bunce Island. Bunce Island supplied Africans from 1750 to the outbreak of the Revolutionary War in America. Thousands and thousands and thousands from this region, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, left from Bunce Island over directly to Charleston. This is key, because the Gullah Geechee culture emerges from that particular group of Africans. And so I hope that answers some of it for you. But
Yes, sir.
also, I want to let you know that South Carolina wasn't always a state. It started as a colony that was as large as South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia in modern terms. So later on, North Carolina separated. It became North Carolina, and then later on, Georgia was cut off at the bottom. But originally, Carolina was all three of those states, and that's very important to note as well. There were many different indigenous Native American people who lived there and had their own cultures. But you know, that's a big story too. Europeans enslaved a lot of indigenous people in South Carolina.
Yes.
A lot.
Yes. Important information. Give thanks for that, Chief. For there. So yeah, I just wanted them to have an understanding of South Carolina. And now, if possible, can we place now the South Carolina in the context of the Civil War, because that's where our story in terms of our ancestor John Martin begins. Yeah. So how does South Carolina become important in the context of the Civil War?
Well, the antebellum period is basically the period in American history where, from 1808, where they legally said, well, the slave trade is over, you can no longer import Africans from Africa, all the way up until emancipation, 1865, right? They consider that the antebellum period of American history. During this period, you had more rebellions, more African rebellions, probably than ever in American history. This is where you had Nat Turner's rebellion during this time. You had both of the Gullah wars during this time, the Seminole Wars. You had Denmark Vesey plot right there in Charleston, South Carolina. So you have these Africans also rumbling for their freedom a lot during this antebellum period. This is the era that the Underground Railroad became very, very famous.
Yes.
This era produced Martin Delaney. This era produced some of our greatest African forefathers in this liberation struggle from that century, this particular era. A lot of the names that we call. And the question of, can we go back and relive our lives in Africa also became very, very prominent during this time. Absolutely. So just from the African perspective, we were fighting. We were fighting at this time. For the Europeans, in South Carolina in particularly, and really all over the South, there had become a struggle between them and the federal government around the question of slavery.
Yes, sir.
And there was a general fight between those who wanted to abolish the slavery, and then there was those who wanted to maintain it and keep it going as long as they wanted under their, quote unquote, state rights.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. There were several slave ships that were affiliated with the South reopening the transatlantic slave trade illegally. You have the Clotilda, which everyone knows about, 1861. But before that, you also had one called a Cora. The Cora came from the same place as one ship that you call the Wanderer, which was 1858. That was 3 years before the war began, 1858. Now the Wanderer is very important because it sets the tone for the conclusion of my answer. On the Wanderer, 410 Africans were brought over from the Congo, illegally smuggled on a yacht that was created and fitted out for slavery in New York City. A New York luxury lot ship was taken to the Congo and converted to a slave ship and brought back. So those Africans came to Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia, and it was 410 of them according to records. Now, the whole federal government, everybody knew about this. Even the smugglers were arrested and they were released over and over again. They were caught with the Africans and released over and over again during the period of them trying to hide these smuggled Africans. But the largest amount of them, almost 200 of them, ended up in South Carolina. And where they ended up in South Carolina is the same place where my ancestor and my ancestors are from. It was an area called the Orangeburg District. It includes modern-day Aiken, some parts of Edgefield, and about maybe 5 or 6 counties around modern-day Orangeburg County. So back then they had districts that were bigger than the counties that we know now. So some of those counties didn't exist. They were just one big district back then. And so the South Carolina enslaver, the white man in South Carolina, he was a nasty buckra. We call him buckra. Let me say, they were the leaders of the Confederacy. They were the first ones to break away and secede from the United States of America, the South Carolina. It wasn't any other state. The first state to cede away, to finally say, we break it off, was the South Carolinians. And on top of that, several of them who played a key role, a key political role in breaking away from the United States, actually held my ancestors enslaved. From David Flavel Jamison to William Gilmore Simms. You can check these names. These are very, very famous names from that period. These were the leaders of the separatist movement that led to the war. So the instigators, the greatest instigators, the ones who, you know, the Union Army really couldn't wait to get their hands on, was the South Carolina men. The South Carolina ones, in fact, the war began in South Carolina. The first shots happened in South Carolina, Fort Sumter. So it started there. It started there. That's where it started. Even the first Africans to organize themselves into a volunteer militia during that time happened in South Carolina. It also happened in Louisiana and several other places, but it happened in South Carolina first. And so there's a lot of things that happened leading up to the war, but also the first shots and the first battles of the Civil War happened right there in South Carolina. That's what I'll say.
All right. And so your great grandfather joins the Union Army in this context. Is that correct?
Yes and no. There's a story behind it. He doesn't necessarily just join the. He doesn't necessarily just join the Union Army. Africans in South Carolina were still enslaved up until 1865. Right. They still were being held by the same enslavers, except for certain parts like Beaufort that liberated or occupied by the Union Army. Did you have emancipated Africans? So Orangeburg District of South Carolina, where my family was at, those Africans were still those who held us enslaved. They were like the key militants in the Confederate Army. So they took a lot of the men to war with them as workforce. You know, you ever thought about who buries the dead during the war? Who you think the undertakers are? Who you think is manning the camp and cooking the food and doing the work and labor? It's the Africans. They took Africans there. You know, and so they called them contraband. They were called contraband during the war. If you know, these were the ones that really led to the Union Army absorbing Africans into the army, because the Confederates had already been using Africans. So my ancestor, according to oral tradition, he was actually a contraband. He was held by Confederates and forced to work and labor at one of their camps until he was rescued. And he was rescued during a very important act. And that's really what this pamphlet is about. During the war, South Carolina was the stronghold of the war. Once South Carolina fell, the war was over. Let me just tell you that. And the question of how South Carolina fell is what I want to really put into perspective.
Yes, sir.
First of all, there was a man named he was a major general in the Union Army, a man named Tecumseh Sherman, white man, Irish man. Yes, he was the one who first practiced or executed scorched earth tactics.
Yeah.
Whereas it became a point where they were so strong, the Confederates were so strong in Georgia and South Carolina that they had to do some unconventional warfare in order to actually, defeat them. And so Tecumseh Sherman, he had turned to Lincoln, he had turned to Grant, he had turned to them and asked them, he said, man, give me permission to go into enemy territory without supplies and forage, basically to pillage and to burn everything. Let me go down there and all out total war. So he had to ask them permission to fuck his brother up. Hey man, let me go beat his ass. He had to ask. But it happened at a time where he had came down from Kentucky, successful. They had taken Atlanta. They burnt Atlanta down to the ground. And in Atlanta, he had decided that he was going to ask permission to now go, dive in. And when he got the permission, the first thing he did was he made a special field order. So let me explain what a special field order is. A special field order is an order that's made by a major general in the military that has the authority to give an order at that time. It doesn't mean that it's a legal thing. The Congress didn't make it happen, but that general had the power at that time to make a special field order. In Atlanta, he made a special field order. It was called Special Field Order number 120. Every order has a different number, but it was Special Field Order number 120, and it's called the order that gave the orders from Atlanta to Savannah. So all of his orders that he wanted to be executed was given at that time before they left Atlanta. It was November 1864. So again, this is called the March to the Sea. A lot of people will say the Sherman's March to the Sea. Inside of his orders that he gave in Atlanta, he also did something that you would say was a liberatory thing, a liberation act. In other words, this is exactly what we're talking about with the Emancipation Proclamation. He did this to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation as he marched to the sea. So the question was, what would happen to the freedmen after they reach a plantation and pillage everything? What would happen with the free Africans? So he gave order that the free Africans could actually trail the military. They could follow the military as long as they foraged, as long as they pillaged, as long as they plundered for the army. They could follow them because they had to feed themselves and defend themselves. So there became this massive following of the army of Africans. And later on, they became known as bummers, B-U-M-M-E-R-S. They called them Sherman's bummers. And so my ancestor became a Sherman's bummer. He became a bummer when he was liberated by Sherman's forces during his march through Carolina. So what happened is that they marched from Atlanta over to Savannah. They took Savannah shortly before Christmas that year, 1864. In fact, Tecumseh Sherman gifted the city of Savannah to President Lincoln for Christmas that year in a letter. But it's not about them, it's about us, because something else happened during the time when Sherman was in Savannah. While Sherman was in Savannah, him and the Secretary of War, men named Stanton, they met with 20 Gullah Geechee leaders, 20 leaders from Savannah and the surrounding area. When you count their congregations or how many people they represented a few. Sorry, Chief. People themselves.
Let me pause you for a second.
Black ministers. Chief. I don't know if they were freedmen. Most of them. There was only one that.
Sorry, Chief. Can you hear me? There's a delay. We got a mad delay going on.
Yeah.
Okay, no, just pause for a second, because I was gonna ask you about this episode. Yeah, so
Can you hear me?
just pause. Yeah, I can hear you, bro. We've got a delay, so we'll work with it. We'll work with it. I just wanted to do one thing before you come on to the story about the meeting with the Gullah chiefs. Yeah. First of all, brothers and sisters, we're speaking to Mansa Foday on Juneteenth, Martin's Rebellion and Black Resistance. And Mansa Foday is going through the history of one of his ancestors, one John Martin, who basically fought in the Union Army. And he's just explained the context in which our ancestor, John Martin, ended up in the Union Army. Yeah. And so we're getting to a point, an interesting point, because we've already laid the context in terms of South Carolina and the fact that our ancestors had formed effectively a nation within a nation, which has now become known as the Gullah Geechee people. Yeah. And so when the Union Army arrives there, a very important meeting takes place. But I did want to just give you an idea of this order that Sherman, Major General Sherman, gave. Yeah, Mansa Foday mentioned Special Field Order 120, and point number 7 in that field order says Negroes who are able-bodied, and I'm reading now from Mansa Foday's essay, which is entitled Martin's Rebellion, a story of Black resistance in the Union Army. Yes, a story of Black resistance in the Union Army. And it says Negroes who are able-bodied and can be of service to the several columns may be taken along, but each army commander will bear in mind that the question of supplies is a very important one, and that his first duty is to see to them who bear arms. Yeah, that his first duty was to see to them who bear arms. And so it sounds like Mansa Foday that according to this field order, the general, wanted the Africans to be taken along to help and assist, but he also commanded those who are in command to feed the actual official army first, yeah, before you feed the Africans who are trading along as the quote unquote bummers, which to me sounds like it was intended to be a derogatory terminology. Am I correct in sensing that? Hey, everything all right? Something's happened there. Can I be heard?
What just happened?
Yeah, something
I can hear you.
You can hear me, yeah? You're on mute, Mansa Foday. All right, brothers and sisters, just sending a shout out to all those who are locked on at the moment. We're getting through the history of Mansa Foday's personal lineage in the context of the Civil War, brothers and sisters. So we're going to be getting into some details here as we get to a conversation that took place here among the Union Army and the Gullah people in South Carolina. But yes, Mansa Foday, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm with you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes, hear you. Good. All right. So yeah, I was saying that whereas the Major General Sherman was encouraging the Africans to trade along with the army, it seemed like he was also concerned with the fact that those who are in command make sure that they feed those who have arms first. Yeah. So that's how
absolutely.
The white man first. Feed the white man first, yeah, before you get around to them.
Absolutely.
to the Negro them. And then it sounds to me as also that the term bummers was designed to be a derogatory terminology. Am I correct in sensing that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're right. But I also want to emphasize that there were already United States colored troops, or what we call USCTs, that was a part of Sherman's army.
Yes, absolutely.
As well, even while they were doing that, it wasn't just bummers. There was also black soldiers there too. But the thing was that they used them a lot to protect the supply lines and to protect the rear and tote things. So, so it was a part of the battle strategy. You know,
Right.
going into Georgia from Atlanta meant that they would not be cut off from all of their supplies. They would have no supply lines to the regular army. They wouldn't be able to communicate till they got to Savannah. They wouldn't be able to get reinforcements or backup till they got to Atlanta. And so, I think there was a little bit of an attempt to try to utilize the fact that there would be hundreds and thousands of freed Africans at this time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
To create a psychological thing, because one thing they said about Sherman was that his strategy was designed to destroy the morale of the Confederacy once and for all. It was to make them think that it was over.
Yes,
that there was a psychological aspect, and he knew it would be scary as hell for white people to hear that these bombers raiding their houses in Georgia while they up in Virginia still trying to fight. So it was psychological. They would just imagine what they were doing to their daughters. Oh my God, they're raiding my plantation. So it was that as well. It was scorched earth warfare, white man on white man, as they call it, right? They went into their barbaric days. So it was effective. Militarily, it was effective. Now, of course, there was an episode there, whereas I believe there was some Africans who were bummers. They were following the army, but then the Confederates began to give chase to the Union, and they had to destroy a bridge, and a whole bunch of Africans drowned as a consequence, not far from Savannah. And so definitely the bummers and the Africans' life were more expendable to the army than their own soldiers. Absolutely. They used us as cannon fodder, I would say, in a lot of kind of ways. They played on the fact that these people would be liberated, would be running around without really no protection, and so a lot of the bummers ended up joining the USCT. A lot of them, when they got to Atlanta, a lot of them joined the USCT, so they could, try to free their families, man. Try to, make sure that it's not going to go back to slavery. But that's what it was about, man. From Atlanta to Savannah was called the March to the Sea. After that, right there, they had the Carolinas campaign, which was a march from Savannah through South Carolina, ending in North Carolina. So those two marches literally broke the back of the Confederacy militarily, and in terms of their morale, they just they had no more fighting. So this is why this particular this Tecumseh Sherman and these particular special orders and this particular march is so important, because this is the march that freed Georgia, and South Carolina and North Carolina, and ultimately gave the Confederate no choice but to surrender at the end of the day. That's how the war ended. That's calculatedly how it ended. Boom, boom, boom.
Okay. Right. Understood, my brother. And so we get to the point now on the 12th of January, 1865, and this meeting that you just alluded to, in relation to the, you're here again, Mansa Foday. Should I add this one?
That's me. I'm trying to get in on
okay, no worries. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll work it out. We'll work it out. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, let me know when you're situated. You want me to talk for a bit before while just getting situated? Okay. You here, King? All right, brothers and sisters. Okay, right. He's here. Yep. Well, good. Beautiful. Right. So we get to now the 12th of January, 1865, and Major General Sherman, Stanton held a meeting with the Gullah Geechee community in South Carolina, and they speak to a man by the name of Garrison Fraser. In Savannah. My apologies, And so they speak to a man who was appointed by the community to speak on their behalf, and his name is Garrison Fraser. And so what happens? What's the significance of this meeting with the Gullah Geechee people?
Oh, it's very significant. It's very, very significant. because here we are, and this, I believe this is December 1864.
Right.
And January 1864, in fact. January is when they actually had the meeting.
Right.
So this is 20, not 1, not 2, not 10. This is 20 black leaders. This is this is the United States military at the time with their Secretary of War and their Major General that's literally breaking the back of the Confederacy in process, meeting with the leaders of the freed, liberated African community. And so it shows you that there was already a structure in place, that there was already a form of leadership. Like you said, nation within a nation concept already.
Yes.
And the significance of this meeting is that they asked them several questions. They asked them, what is slavery? And they had Fraser define it. And now Fraser was a minister, so he was eloquent. And he defined it. He said, this is what slavery is.
Yes.
And and then they asked them, they said, what is this emancipation? What does it mean to you? He said, this is what emancipation means. They said, okay, he understands it. They said, well, do you think it's best for the whites and the blacks to live together or live separate for now? And they said, live separate. It's two races. We don't want to live with y'all just right now like that. Give us some land.
Yes, sir.
Give us some seeds.
Yes,
we
sir.
can send our boys to go fight. Our women can stay home, and our kids can stay home, and we can farm. And eventually, we want to own this land. So this is what he said. He said we want to be able to own this land. And what happens is that within 3 or 4 days later, Sherman comes with an act, another special order. But I'll get into that after this. You know.
You good? All right. Yeah. So that's important, yo. So I just wanted to highlight that the people them in Savannah, Georgia, the Gullah people are already organizing, and there's a community structure there, and there's a culture there, and there are people who are advocating on the part of the people, and not only that, as Mansa Foday has said, they're seeking some level of self-determination, among themselves, to be able to live among themselves, to be able to till their own land, and be able to have custodianship over that land also at that time, and so this is very, very important. Now, I'm going to come back to that particular aspect of the thing, because I think that a lot of the stories about this period in history I think that story is left out for a particular reason. But you wanted to make another point in terms of what the Gullah Geechee ancestors were looking for at the time. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just reflecting on it, because you just got to understand, 20 leaders, they led hundreds and hundreds of Africans. Look, when you go and read the actual documentation, they tell you how many people each of them had behind them in terms of congregations and things like this. So I believe some of them were like what you call freed Negroes at the time, or freedmen. They were free before everything. So some of them had some education and everything. But what's important to understand is that demand is still there among the people of Savannah and the people of the Gullah Geechee culture.
Yes.
We still have this ongoing dispute.
Yes.
That starts all the way from that. It's almost like in Jamaica, you have people, you have the maroon culture, right? And you have a situation where you had Africans that were enslaved by the Spaniards before the British arrived. And when the Spaniards left, they had their freedom, and the British had to deal with them, right? And so they had certain kind of relationships and communications with the British that now they use to declare and show you that they were sovereign. You understand? That they basically were free, that they had a political sovereignty.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so, to me, for the Union Army to have to meet 20 Gullah Geechees in Savannah when they finally got there, in order to figure out what the future of the relationship was going to be between Gullah Geechee people and the United States of America, right? It's almost that kind of moment too, and like you said, this meeting gets wiped under the table because it's indicative of the fact that it happened, that those leaders were Gullah Geechees, and that Tecumseh Sherman and Stanton both recognized them as a separate people and gave them the same kind of meeting that you could imagine between Jamaican Maroons and the British early on.
Yes, sir.
It happened in the context of warfare.
Yes,
it was the same situation.
Yes, sir.
You know?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's important to note, brothers, is that the United States of America, as we know it today, didn't exist at this point, right? It's a very different land, very different, framing of the land. Even the borders were very, very different. It's very, very different place. Much of what we consider to be out west wasn't part of the the United States in the way that it is today. You know what I'm saying? Like Oklahoma is still just being settled, and you know what I'm saying? Like there's a whole story about Oklahoma and how they shafted the indigenous people out of even more land, and that was coming into the 1850s and into this time. So it's a mad story, all right, of some serious like colonial imperialism at this time here. But time doesn't allow us to go into that. Now we've been talking about Mansa Foday's answers. By the way, brothers and sisters, I'm going to share the link soon. I'm going to share the link soon for those who want to interact with Mansa Foday and ask some questions and interact. And special shout out to Brother Rakeem Shabazz. I was going to reiterate, if you're still listening, I'd love to get your perspective on this history as well. Because I know you have a connection to a lot of these places. Rakeem Shabazz. All right. But if you would like to ask a question in the chat, or have a comment read out in the chat, please @GotKush TV in your comment. So I'm aware of the fact that you want your comment to be read out, so that I can differentiate between conversation in the chat and comments or questions that are meant to be read out. Right? I would appreciate if you could @GotKush TV, but once again, I'll be sharing the link soon so that you can come and interact with Chief Foday live. Now, Mansa Foday, we've been talking about your ancestor, John Martin, but there's another Martin who I want to highlight, from this period. One of my favorites, I've always had a
love him.
I've always had a spiritual connection to this ancestor. And it's possibly because of my love for Marcus Garvey and the extent to which Papa Garvey is really an ideological descendant, of this man right here. His name is Martin Delany. By the way, let me also shout out the name David Walker, because in that line of ancestors that you were naming in terms of that antebellum period, David Walker is extremely important. So we just want to put that out there. If you don't know, get to know. But Martin Delany. Go ahead.
No, you just called the name. You just called the name, David Walker.
Sir. Yes,
we
sir.
sleep on David Walker. Do you know David Walker is a Geechee too? He's from
I
North
didn't know
Carolina.
he was Geechee. I didn't know he was Geechee. Yeah, I didn't know he was Geechee. Go ahead.
Listen, and he ended up being a part of Denmark Vesey's plot, but he escaped. That's how he got to the north. He was a part of the plot. He's supposed to get hung with Denmark Vesey.
Yes, sir.
But he escaped and went up north, and then he did the David Walker appeal.
Yes, sir.
Imagine.
Yes, sir. David, if you have not read David Walker's appeal, read David Walker's appeal. It's a very serious document. Very, very serious document, brothers and sisters. All right, and they're not going to tell you this history in the stories about the founding of the United States and the founding fathers and the development of the Union. They're not going to tell you them story. So pay attention, and we give thanks for Mansa Foday for being here to elucidate this for us in even greater detail. So first and foremost, what is the role of the man who is commonly referred to as the father of Black nationalism in the Union Army? How does Martin Delany, the man who was championing nationhood, for African people in the United States of America, the man who was championing migration from the United States to other parts of the Americas and or the African continent, how does he end up in the Union Army and in the leadership of the Union Army of the African regiments in the Union Army?
That's a great question.
Yes, sir.
first of all, Martin Delany was highly respected.
Mm-hmm.
Martin Delany was the descendant of royal Africans. He even had an ancestor who was liberated and ended up going back to Africa because he was royal.
Mm-hmm.
He was of Gullah and Mandinka ancestry through his mother and his father. So he technically was a Mende. That's what they would call a Mende here, right? He was from this region. But he ended up being born free because his mother was freed. Because of her father's status, I believe, right? It was her father's status. Her father was royal. He ended up going back to Africa, and and then her father escaped to Canada. Yeah, his father escaped to Canada, and then he got something. Either way, Martin Delany. I'm telling you, listen, his lineage is just like other people's, whereas he had a history of ancestors who rebelled as well. One of them was royal and ended up going back to Africa, and the other one rebelled, ran to Canada, and never got heard from again on the other side. So he had that fire in his bones, and that's what I really was trying to, get across. He had the fire in his bones already, and like you said, how does this man who, let me say, a few months before the war breaks out, is literally in Africa negotiating land?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In what is today Nigeria? Yeah.
Yeah, with a brother from Jamaica.
Yes. Robert Campbell.
Yeah, exactly. So just look at that. We say he's the father of Black nationalism, but that's Pan-Africanism. That's an African from the Caribbean and an African from the United States working together to find land that I'm sure wasn't just for Africans in the United States.
Absolutely.
You understand? This is people working together, understanding what took place in Freetown, what took place in Liberia. Let's go do this for ourselves now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You understand?
Yes,
so Martin Delany, he became completely disillusioned with the United States in terms of it being a permanent place for us to remain. Also, there was a whole lot of radical abolitionism going on at that particular time. People were beginning to take arms more. People was trying to do things.
Yes, sir.
And including in that was several underground organizations. In Atlanta, you had Moses Dixon. They had a large organization, like 17,000 Africans or something in one organization, underground. They were ready to fight and start the war before the war ever began. But he said, he was watching the politics and said, no, just wait, they about to fight. And sure enough, they started fighting, so all they had to do was get involved. And up north, they had what they called the Lincoln's Loyalty League. These were people that was loyal to the Constitution and sided with Lincoln, that wanted to, also end slavery in the South. So Delaney, Douglas, their children, they were already members of militias, Black militias. They were already drilled and things like this. They were already preparing for some kind of engagement. This is very important to understand. That we wasn't going to wait for them to free us.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's very, very important to understand. And they knew that too. You understand? So Martin Delany, from my understanding, once the war broke out, he understood the war has just broke out. He returned first to Canada. And then from Canada, he crossed back into the United States and he became a recruiter. He was recruiting after the Emancipation Proclamation. In 1863, when that act came into play, Martin Delany was one of the main recruiters. His sons, two of his sons, fought as Union soldiers. Frederick Douglass' sons fought as Unions. They gave their sons to this fight.
Yes,
you understand? And so in the middle of that, at the same time, in February 1865, Delaney went to talk to Lincoln. He went to visit him in the White House. And he asked them for an army. He basically said, man, let me recruit my own men and let me lead my own black army in this fight. And so he convinced Lincoln so much that Lincoln was like, man, that's the most intelligent man I ever heard talk. He blew Lincoln's mind. Lincoln was like, hell yeah, let's do it.
Yes.
So he assigned him to to the 104th United States Colored Troops, where he served as a major. So he was the highest ranking African in the Union Army.
Right.
Lincoln appointed him himself, said, what, man, put him at the top, let him have his army. Yeah. He was assigned to South Carolina. He was assigned to Beaufort, South Carolina in particular, which is where my ancestor ended up at as well. Yes. But of course, even when he got there, he was recruiting down there and doing a lot of administrative work inside and working with the soldiers directly. And you know, they really didn't like him, man. They really didn't like him after that. But after the war, he also got involved with the Freedmen Bureau. So he worked for the Freedmen Bureau as well. He worked to help people secure their original lands. These lands that people right now are fighting about, saying that you know, the heirs land that's being stolen in South Carolina now, you know, from developers, from gentrification. You know, a lot of times the people got the land, and Delaney was down there educating them and organizing them, making sure they secured their lands right there in places like St. Helena and around the Charleston area. So he was a great asset to the African community that was being liberated at the time in the Gullah lands in that particular part of South Carolina, that coastal area where he was assigned. You know, it had to feel good to know that he on our side, like, you know, that's our highest ranking in the army. He right here with us in South Carolina. Now, a lot of people don't know that Martin Delany spent his last 20 years of his life in South Carolina. He didn't leave South Carolina after the war. He stayed. He even ran for Lieutenant General in South Carolina. He had a whole political career and everything. You understand? So Martin Delany spent 2 decades in South Carolina after he was assigned there by Lincoln. Right there among Gullah Geechee people. Yes, sir. He also organized. He also was one of the organizers of the Azore. He one of the financiers and organizers of the Azore as well. What they call the Liberia Exodus, which is at the end of Reconstruction in 1877. You know, they had what they call the Tilden and Hayes Agreement. The white people, they agreed that, okay, it's over. We're going to have peace now. You can run your states again. And this is when the Klan came in, the red shirts came in, and we got locked into this Jim Crow shit, right? Absolutely. But there was a period of time where we exercised some political power. We were struggling for it. We were fighting for it. And after the Tilden and Hayes, there was a call for 1 million black men to return back to go back to Africa and go to Liberia and build that up. And they only had one ship that went, called the Azore, but he helped to organize that as well. Him and others. Him and I believe it was Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, another kid in South Carolina. Absolutely. And others. So it's very important that even the last ship that left South Carolina at that time, or anywhere in the United States and went back to Liberia, was also partially organized by Martin Delany. Yes, sir. All right, give thanks for that. And so that I want to bring those two strands together now, because whilst Martin Delany is in South Carolina, John Martin is also in South Carolina, and so they're both involved in this act of rebellion that kicks off after the conclusion of the Civil War. So what happened there? Why were Africans still rebelling after the Civil War? What was the circumstances that went into that? Well, all right, I give it to you raw. You really want it? All yes, right. Sir. Yes, sir. Well, we we didn't agree with the new contract.
Right.
We didn't like it. It wasn't fair.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
This is the sharecropping.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't agree. We didn't agree with the immediate Freedmen Bureau negotiated contracts with our former enslavers. We didn't agree with them. We had a completely different. We had a whole protest and demand.
Yes, sir.
It was a whole. It was a whole thing about how much of the crops do we keep? Do we get Saturdays and Sundays off? There was a whole bunch of things that was considered, and our ancestors wanted half of the crops. We wanted Saturday and Sundays off. We wanted certain things. We had labor demands.
Yes, sir.
Fresh out of slavery.
Yes, sir.
We had demands. And so we wanted to have land. We wanted to have education. We had certain demands. We had definitely serious demands. And they was just going out into the communities and confusing people who weren't properly being sensitized or being educated about it, and they was getting locked into these contracts. And you know, the people in the army who was close to Martin Delany was being sensitized by Martin Delany. And you know, I'll go into some detail about it, but let me just give you this you know, this thing. Martin Delany was made the major in mid-February. My ancestor joined the Union Army March 8th, about 3 weeks after Martin Delany became a major. Right. So just so you can understand the time frame. Delaney's a major with his two sons fighting in the army, and then he ends up in Charleston. Boom, he ends up in South Carolina. Boom.
Sorry, Mansa Foday. Just a quick thing. I forgot to mention this earlier. Just to note that one of Delaney's sons is called Toussaint. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out, that connection there, because of the inspiration from the IT revolution. Yeah, just wanted to point that out. He named his son after Toussaint Louverture. But go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, so just to give you the time frame wise, this is my ancestor, my great grandfather, Charles McClellan, alias Private John Martin, and Martin Delany, man, this great African nationalist figure who shared the same space in the same military at the same time, with Martin Delany being the highest ranking African in the United States of America's military at the same time. So they were at the same camp. Yeah. At the same time, but in different units and different ranks. One was a private, one was a major. But the general thing was that in documentation, we find that there were reports of, there were several reports that was made from the time where Martin Delany and my ancestor was together in Beaufort up until my ancestor's rebellion, which took place in June of that year. And so let me see how I can summarize it best to give you the full story, because it's so much to consider in telling this story. Okay. Our people at the time in Beaufort, South Carolina, where the first emancipated Africans, the first self-liberated Africans were there. They had what they called an experiment called Mitchellville. It was an experiment to kind of like create the ideal freedmen community that they wanted to be able to have. So it was like a federal experiment right there in Beaufort, and it was called Mitchellville. So you also had probably the largest freedmen community right there in that region, also right there near the main base. So during the Civil War, you had different theaters of war. You had the Western Theater, you had the Potomac Theater up in Virginia and that area. And for South Carolina, you had the Department of the South. And the Department of the South was headquartered at Beaufort, South Carolina, that county. So that's why I keep saying it, Beaufort. So they ended up at the Army's headquarters. Together. Yes, sir. So there was a report. Okay, I talked about Lincoln being assassinated. The next month in May, of that same year, 1865, maybe about 2 weeks or 3 weeks before my ancestor does his act. The Freedmen Bureau, which is the war is over at this time. They're now in Reconstruction era. They're trying to get people on labor contracts. The Freedmen Bureau is now saying, okay, we need for everybody, all the commissioners out there who's trying to, reinstate law and reinstate order into the situation, because it had became anarchy. Right. Africans is out there wild and they weren't listening to nobody, man. They ain't want to work. They was bugging. And there was no sense of quote unquote law and order at the time. When Sherman came through South Carolina, he burned shit down. And the Africans were just running around freely. So they was trying to get us back in the cage, so to speak. So it's happening at this period. This is what's happening at the exact time. So the Freedmen Bureau is telling these commissioners to do a research and then give them a report on the status of law and order and things like that within their areas. So the chairman in Orangeburg District, he does his report. In his report, he explains, like, man, these people they're rebelling. He says they won't listen to anybody but the colored troops. Yes, sir. He said the colored troops have them thinking that they should get exactly what they're demanding. Yes. Right. Yes. And some of them wanted to get revenge. Some of them wanted to. There was violence going on. We were sucker punching white boys. Yes. And so, and then they was worrying about, the army was worried about starvation. Because we didn't want to work. So the Freedmen Bureau came in to get us back to work. Right. So that report is from May. Now, my ancestor is from Orangeburg District. Okay. If that is happening in Orangeburg District at the same time while this person is making this report. So in the report, he also says that there's about 3 to 5 commissioners working the whole district. That there's not a sheriff. There's no way to really know what's going on in all parts. But also in that same report, this man says that they had successfully entered contracts with thousands of Africans. So thousands of Africans had entered the labor contract. Okay. So they were being forced to enter the labor contract that they specifically was having demands about. They specifically were saying, this ain't what we want. But they was being forced into that. And so I personally believe that if there was a political motivation for my ancestors' rebellion, for his act, it would have been that. It would have been that. Okay. If anything, because of course, if the report is saying that the Union Army in Orangeburg is spreading this word to the people, what do you think the Union Army is saying in Beaufort, the headquarters? What do you think the colored troops in Beaufort are saying? Yes, sir. And so, he's a colored troop in Beaufort from Orangeburg, while this white boy is making this report back to base. Yes, sir. On June 2nd, 4th, right? 2nd. June 2nd, I'm sorry. June 2nd, 1865. Private John Martin, they say he deserts. He runs away. When I was able to finally get to his military, what you call it? Yeah, his court martial from the military. I was able to read the details of his trial and get insight into what that desertion actually meant. It wasn't just a quote unquote desertion. Right. He left on June 2nd with guns. They said specifically a Springfield rifle and some ammunition. And he left with some comrades as well. And they took them about 11 days or 12 to track them down and bring them back to prison. Right. It doesn't say too much what happened other than the fact that the snitch who told on him the snitch who told on him, he said he wasn't sure if it was one of his guns that he left with was brought back to the back to the base, because they brought guns back, and they brought other deserters back. So this is an act of group desertion. Imagine me, you, and maybe 4 or 5 other Africans saying, "Man, we got to get up out of here."
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We grab our guns, man. We make a run for it.
Right.
And so it wasn't just a desertion where they just snuck off and just hid in the corner or something like that. Nah, they left with arms, and they were brought back with arms. Right. So that happened. They was brought back on I believe June 12th. June 12th they were brought back. And then in the same regiment, about a week later, 10 days later, there was another act of defiance that took place as well. There was a man named John Greer, and he was instructed to clean his rifle, and he rebelled. He was like, "Man, I ain't cleaning it. Go get me somebody higher than you." He disrespected the white boy who gave him the order. And when they tried to grab him anyway, he fought it out with them. He ended up getting locked up too, court-martialed and sent to prison in Florida. So the last thing that paints out this whole period of rebellion, from my ancestors' rebellion and him and his comrades, to this brother John Greer, who's in the same regiment, just in a different company, also rebelling, disobeying direct order. And then you have something that happened the following month in July. I believe it was July 21st, if I'm not mistaken. Martin Delaney is working now in the Freedmen Bureau. Yeah. But they don't trust him. Yeah. And they don't trust him, bro. So they took the lieutenant from the same unit, from the same regiment that he was the major of, his own lieutenant. Yes. And also one of the officers from John Martin, my own ancestors, 128th Regiment, and sent them over to the Bricks Church on St. Helena Island to spy on his speech. And you can check it out. You can go on Google right now and find Martin Delaney's advice to the freedmen. Yes. A very famous speech. Yes. Well, that speech was actually something that was written down and reported back to the Freedmen Bureau by spy. By spy, yeah. By spy. It was a spy report. And so in there, you hear Martin Delaney saying the same exact thing that the white boy was saying in Orangeburg. The same exact rhetoric. He's saying the same rhetoric as the colored troops are accused of saying. So, of course, this is Martin's rebellion, because even Martin Delaney was involved in this rebellion if he was inciting the freed Africans to rebel, to resist. So this is the Union Army. These are people in the Union Army who's within the colored troops that are actually rebelling at the same time within the army for many different reasons, because really they didn't treat the United States colored troops too good. Well, yeah, absolutely. They didn't want to pay them. Usually, if they were deserted, they would try to kill them. So imagine had they killed my ancestor instead of arrest him. Yes. So in September, he goes to trial. When he goes to trial in September, he loses. They find him guilty of desertion. Right? You know what, Chief Foday, I'm gonna ask you to pause there, only because I want people to actually read the article. So if they want to get the rest of the story in terms of John Martin, let them read the article. Yeah, the link to the article is linked in the description to the video. The article is entitled "Martin's Rebellion: A Story of Black Resistance in the Union Army," and it features Mansa Foday's great grandfather within the context of the Civil War and the act of rebellion that he was a part of, along with a number of African soldiers who were in the Union Army, brothers and sisters. I'm gonna encourage you to go check out the piece here and read it and get the full story of what happened to our ancestor
John Martin, aka Charles McClellan. All right. So I got one more question for you, Chief, for there, and then I'm gonna open up the lines. But before I actually bring you the question, because you mentioned Martin Delaney's words, I'm gonna read some of them. Because they're very interesting. I'm gonna read a piece of it that you put in the article. He says, "Your masters who lived in opulence kept you to hard work by some contemptible being called overseer, who chastised and beat you whenever he pleased, while your master lived in some northern town or in Europe to squander away the wealth only you acquired for him. He never earned a single dollar in his life. You men and women, every one of you around me, made thousands and thousands of dollars for your masters. Only you were the means for your masters to lead the ideal and inglorious life and to give his children the education which he denied to you. For fear you may awake to conscience. If I look around me, listen to this part now. If I look around me, I tell you, all the houses of this island and in Beaufort, they are all familiar to my eye. They are the same structures which I have met with in Africa. They have all been made by Negroes. You can see it by such exteriors." And he goes on to say, "You ought further to know that all the spices, cotton, rice, and coffee has only been brought over by you from the land of our brethren." Very important words, and I'm highlighting that only because I want people to understand. And by the way, if you become a patron, you'll be able to watch a lecture by Brother Robin Walker, historian Robin Walker, called "We Create Value: The Ingenuity of Enslaved Africans." And he details the extent to which what became standardized American architecture in this period, was actually brought by Africans, particularly from Yorubaland, like a lot of, and when Baba Delaney is talking here, he's talking about his sojourn in part in Yorubaland, in West Africa, and he's saying that a lot of the houses, so what they call the shotgun house, is African architecture, brothers and sisters. And not only is the architecture African, but even the term shotgun house, it is speculated that it derives from a Yoruba terminology. I'm not even gonna say anymore. Just check out the Patreon and you'll be able to see the lecture "We Create Value" by Brother Robin Walker. But Chief Foday, my last question to you before I open up the lines is that you ask a very interesting question at the end of this piece, and it might be confusing to some, but I want to get your thoughts on it. You end by asking, you're paraphrasing Frederick Douglass, and you say, "What to Charles McClellan, alias John Martin, descendants is Juneteenth." What to Charles McClellan, John Martin's descendants is Juneteenth. Why have you concluded with that question?
For the same reason that Frederick Douglass asked the question, what to the slave is the 4th of July? What does it mean to we? What to the Negro, what is the 4th of July? It's because my ancestor was a political prisoner on Juneteenth. He was incarcerated. He was locked up for an act of rebellion within the Union Army on that day. And they don't talk about that side of the story. He didn't get out until December. So I asked myself, is Juneteenth something that's relevant to me in particular? Because for my lineage, my ancestor was still incarcerated. He still had his Freedom Day. He went from being a captive at a Confederate camp to freed to becoming a bummer to enlisting in the military and ultimately rebelling in the military and being incarcerated. And on Juneteenth, him and his comrades had just been returned from an act of rebellion. So what does it mean to me? What does it mean to my sister? What does it mean to my mother? To Juneteenth? And we have to put these kind of things into perspective. So I asked the question because there were 200,000 Africans who fought formerly in the Union Army.
Okay.
It wasn't, out of the 4.5 Africans that they say was in the country at the time, only 200,000 fought, but that's a significant number, and we don't really understand that.
Yeah.
We played a vital role. We played a very vital role.
Yes.
And and many of them were like my ancestor, rebelling within the army from acts of racism, from brutality, all kinds of things they were doing to them Africans, and they still was fighting. And so before they couldn't tell the difference between, if I'm emancipated, then why are you still treating me like a slave? They didn't understand. Military got a real strict order system. They were like, man, what is this? And so what, that's why I asked the question rhetorically, like, for a person like me, what is the 4th of July? I'm sorry, Juneteenth. What is Juneteenth to me? When I can't necessarily celebrate my that, because they say Juneteenth was when the last Africans got free. But mine hadn't tasted the day of freedom yet.
Interesting.
Right there in South Carolina.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Interesting question, brothers and sisters. So we're gonna just leave that question open. You know what I'm saying? I think if you get back to the beginning of the show, Mansa Foday has already given his perspective on whether or not he celebrates Juneteenth. I'll leave you to rewind if you didn't see that already. But it's a real thing. You mentioned it, and I know it happens every year for those of us who are from Africa and the Caribbean. As you said, whenever independence come around, we enjoy the celebration. We like to celebrate our culture, you know what I'm saying, and go to the party them. I've been to X amount of Jamaica independence, and even Ghana independence, and Nigeria independence dance, enjoy myself. But then when you separate yourself from the party, you have to ask yourself, well, what is independence really? Yeah, and are we really independent? That conversation comes up all the while. It happens. So, brothers and sisters, now is your time. I'm gonna the link is in the chat. You can click that link if you want to come and interact with Mansa Foday. We're not gonna day out the all night, We're not gonna day out the all night. So don't wait for half hour for click the link here. Click the link right here now. Come through and you can interact with Mansa Foday, ask him a question. And if you would prefer to just ask your question from the chat, some of you have done so already, feel free to @GotKush TV and I will read your question out. Without further ado, let me introduce to you Set Imhotep in the building. Greetings, my king.
Please, can I be clearly heard?
Yes, king, you can be. Give thanks for joining us. What's your question?
Peace and victory.
Yes, sir.
Peace and victory and Pan-African power to everybody under the sound of my voice.
Aye.
I have one question, but if you'll allow me just to give the brother his praises first, Brother Shakara.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I want to give thanks sincerely for Mansa Foday's presence. You kind of gas him up at the beginning of the show talking about, you could talk about history for about 30 minutes nonstop, man. And from the time he started to speak, I realized that is probably very true. And I very much, for a man like me, that is a sincere, not only is that a compliment, that's a benefit to my life, I sincerely desire, as long as it's convenient, if the brother can return to the platform as frequently as possible. I've learned quite a lot today. But most in the audience might know my story a little bit already, but I come from Trinidad and Tobago. So we don't have a lot of United States history being taught as part of the regular curriculum, at least not when I was going to school. So a lot of what you said today is the first time I've ever heard it in my life, so I really sincerely give thanks for that. I also wanted to kind of maybe highlight something, and maybe something only I experienced, but as far as I know, in English-speaking Africans, because maybe of the recency of the British Empire, we tend to give the British quite a lot of flack for, their enslaving empire. But number one, they weren't the first, and number two, I don't even think they necessarily were the worst. As the brother Mansa Foday was telling us earlier, the Spanish were the first to colonize what became the United States, the land that became the United States of America. And even though, because you learn the history disjointedly, that kind of makes sense, you never really click, you never really click those things together at the same time. So I wanted to also express my appreciation for you for making that click in my own head as well. Like, we really need to do a lot of focus on the Portuguese, the French, and the Spanish empires, and the history of their enslavement of our ancestors across the Atlantic. Well, not just across the Atlantic, also on the continent, right? And so the question I had is, unfortunately, a little bit tangential from the discussion that you were having. Well, hopefully it still fits within the context. I saw that the House of Representatives passed in the United States recently the automatic registering of males 18 to 26 for selective service in the United States military. Because I know that there has been a history of anti-war activism within the African American space, where, in the context of not having their own human rights respected within that nation, they reject the idea of being sent to fight other nations on behalf of this nation. I wanted to know what the Mansa's perspective on that might be for Africans who live in America at the present day.
Go ahead, Mansa Foday.
So, just to get clarity, are you asking? I think I need to hear it again. Just the last part.
Sorry, I was getting in trouble to unmute. In the context of anti-war activism by African Americans in the past in the United States, where they reject the idea of being sent to fight for the United States when they're not getting human rights in the United States. What is your opinion on? Well, as far as I'm aware, the House of Representatives passed. What do you call it? I just had it up.
Basically, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
The authorization of defense or something like that is the name of the act. And basically, it's automatically registering all males between the age of 18 and 26 for selective service in the United States. What's your opinion on what African Americans should do?
I think we should resist. We prior to the Vietnam War, we had fought in every war prior to that, and really Africans have fought in every war in U.S. history. But prior to the Vietnam War ended the draft historically. Their ability to.
Hey, very unfortunate timing right there. So Mansa for the drop off, you know what I'm saying? But we'll get him back, brothers and sisters. Don't worry about nothing. Give thanks to Imhotep for asking that question. That the issue of the recent draft was actually raised at the beginning of the show. So thank you for bringing us back to it. You know, and all of these things. Mansa Foday is back. By the way, shout out to the West Indies cricket team for mashing up Afghanistan yesterday. You don't know, you know what I'm saying? I just want to say a special shout out. Let's talk that we win the tournament. But
even though I don't celebrate Afghanistan's loss, but we celebrate West Indies' victory.
Absolutely. Give thanks. All right, go ahead, Mansa Foday. Go ahead.
Yeah, so if you remember, Elijah Muhammad resisted the draft, went to prison. Malcolm X, they tried to draft Malcolm. Malcolm said, "No, man, if you give me a gun, I'm a Garvey. I'm gonna kill some white boys." They said, "Okay." If you go forward to even Muhammad Ali, the most famous anti-draft case, right? So I think that right now, in the face of a rising hostile white nationalism, we have to absolutely resist being sent to fight these crackers' wars. We have to be open about it. It has to be on every black person in the world's mind, actually, because this exploitation of our military exploitation of African people is one of the biggest reasons why the U.S. military is so dominant in the world. They exploit this military power we have, this ability, because a lot of people go to the military to make some money, man. Most of the Africans who voluntarily go to the military are trying to climb out of poverty, are trying to get access to some support with education, trying to get some benefits long-term in their life, you know? There's something they're trying to secure out of the military. It's not necessarily a loyalty or love for America. But when you talk about forcing 18 to 26-year-olds to enlist to be on call for war, I think that's just indicative that the United States sees nothing but war on their agenda. It's indicative of the vision that the United States of America has for itself as they begin to go. And 50 years ago, we got rid of this, you know, but now they're bringing it back. And so we got to ask ourselves, what is that? And why is that happening now? So I think we should openly resist it. I think we should have a whole lot of discussions in every local community throughout the United States of America, in our houses, in our churches, in our mosques, in our schools. We need to have this discussion as a people, so that the politically educated people need to really, really take this issue and educate, because we talk about World War III, World War this, World War that. We've always been in a state of war, always. And when you see what they're doing right now in Africa, you see Africa kicking the United States military out. You see, you understand? They already have the highest ranking African American in history heading AFRICOM right now. You see, they just kicked them out of Niger, said, "Man, get out of here, nigga." So we can't side. We can't afford to side with imperialism at this point. And the most the way that we side with them the most is militarily. That's the most dangerous way to side with your enemy, to be part of the military apparatus. Now, being that they forced us in the past to be that, and even we're talking about it right here, in 2024, we should resist. We should rebel if necessary. We should use it as an opportunity to show the world that black people, black men, women in the United States and around the world, we're not taking that shit no more. Absolutely.
Give thanks for that, Sir Imhotep. A very, very important question. And I'm gonna get some comments from the chat right about now. So this bear with me. Anthony McPhail says, peace to the panel and the chat. We can't forget the convict leasing program along with the sharecropping system. Absolutely. And I think Mansa Foday has gone some way into explaining that. I just want to add though that we have to bear in mind, because they do the same thing with us as Africans in the Caribbean. They act as though after enslavement ended, the exploitation ended. And we must be clear about the fact that as far as Africans across the Americas are concerned, whether it's the 1830s in the Caribbean or the 1860s in the United States, the transition out of slavery led to different forms of exploitation. And Mansa Foday referred to the sharecropping. Similar systems existed in the Caribbean, which is why you have a Morant Bay Rebellion in the 1860s in Jamaica, for example, But as far as America is concerned, it's necessary to also highlight that the Reconstruction era is also referred to as the Gilded Age, which is where American capitalism cements itself, as the economic order, and begins to they consider it a period of rapid economic growth. This is the capitalist order. But in that context, Africans were subject to an exploitative agricultural economic order and system referred to as sharecropping, whereby the benefits of their labor was still being exploited by the same people who were enslaving our ancestors in America previously. It's very, very important to understand the role that sharecropping played in the economy of the United States of America during a period that they consider to be one of their economic golden ages, brothers and sisters. Extremely important. And if you had anything to add to that, Mansa Foday.
Yeah, I wanted to say, absolutely. The convict leasing program is very, very important because, of course, we know about the 13th Amendment. We know about the 15th, 16th, 17th amendments, right? We know all about these amendments that they made supposedly to end slavery, to bring about civil rights and transition African people into some kind of civilized living, right? Some kind of a civil life, some kind of legal citizenship life, right? But he's absolutely right, Anthony. You're absolutely right, brother. The convict leasing system is the seed of mass incarceration today. Without them creating what they call the convict leasing system then, you wouldn't have mass incarceration today. The seed of it starts there. It says literally, I believe the 13th Amendment, that says slavery nor involuntary servitude should be allowed in the United States except for when one is duly punished for a crime. The question is, what is a crime? And so back then, even not having a sharecropping lease made you
criminal.
You can get locked up for it. You can get locked up for not having a contract with for not being a sharecropper.
Yes, sir.
For being idle. You know,
sir.
So they had so many petty ways to lock you up. On top of the Jim Crow, the racism, they'll lock you up for any damn thing, just like they will today. But back then it was a lot more raw. So he's correct. Incarceration became something. It became a political question. It became a way to not only re-enslave us, but also a way for them to rebuild that country, to rebuild the infrastructure that was destroyed by Sherman when he came through and destroyed the railroads. You know, so they rebuilt after the Civil War, largely using exactly
African
what
labor.
Anthony is saying, this two-pronged system of convict leasing and sharecropping.
Absolutely.
You know?
Very, very important point. So thank you, Anthony, for bringing us back to that. We have to understand the economic system and how it developed, especially because there's a lot of propaganda out there. If you're from the US, it's amazing how unified and similar these colonizers and imperialists are, because the same way that they try to diminish the extent to which African enslavement and colonization contributed to the wealth of Britain, they do the same in the United States of America in terms of the extent to which African enslavement and internal colonialism, as was referred to by Baba Kwame Ture, contributed to the wealth of America. They do the same thing, brothers and sisters. Imhotep asks, give us the name of this tune. And I'm assuming that you're referring to the opening, the intro music. There is no name to the tune. That's just a compilation that I put together based upon some resources that I have at my disposal. So unfortunately, I can't give you the name of the tune. But yeah, we'll talk offline and I'll sort you out. All right. Imhotep as a mod is asking on behalf of A-Not 424. Where did David Walker come from?
David Walker was originally in North Carolina. That's where he was from, North Carolina. I believe he was a freedman. He ended up somehow, whatever, I don't know, was born free or, got free during his life. But I know that he ended up being in Charleston, and from Charleston he ended up going all the way up into New England, I believe Boston or something like that. But he was from originally North Carolina. He was a part of the Denmark-Vesey plot as well. Check him out.
Yes, sir. Very, very important, man. Natron, big up yourself, Natron, says, this is a little off topic, but what do you think about the ANC putting the colonizer back in power in the government in South Africa? Natron, stay tuned. Yeah. Within no more than 2 weeks, we will have somebody from Azania, South Africa on. It's already in the works. Let's agree on a date at the moment. So stay tuned. We're going to get into that travesty that has just taken place in Azania, South Africa. We're going to get into that travesty there. The deep betrayal that has just taken place, in Azania, South Africa. We're going to break it all the way down with brothers and sisters on the ground in Azania, South Africa, brothers and sisters. So I'm going to ask you to stick a pin. So we're going to get into it. But Mansa Foday, because you're here now, if you want to make a comment on it, feel free to do so. Don't feel obliged, though. But yeah.
It's like what you said. It's a setback.
Yeah.
Setback. It's a big betrayal. But I'll definitely, like you said, I'll leave the conversation to those on the ground because I'm interested in hearing what's going on with the people.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's a pivotal time right now in Africa. For those of you who are not in Africa living here, it's different it's a lot different here on the ground. You can see a new Africa, struggling to be born. You can see a new Africa struggling. The youth and the people here get it. They're beginning to understand that, we have to do something. And you can see in certain parts of Africa, you can see things heating up, particularly in the Sahel and places like that. But it's like, where do we go from even there? What's next?
Sir.
What's the
yes, sir.
And so this defeat, this betrayal in Azania, South Africa, is just, it's a setback. It's a setback. It's a big setback and a challenge to this liberation struggle. So
absolutely,
hopefully we can hear more and learn more what we can do with our comrades, our brothers and sisters down there to clean that up, man, because it's really all against the land question.
Absolutely. Brothers and sisters, you're tuned into Got Kush TV, soon to become Kimbunga Media. And so I want you to stay tuned. I want you to like this video. I want you to subscribe to the channel to stay in tune, because we're going to do our best to provide you Pan-African news, brothers and sisters, from around the Pan-African world. And as much as possible, we are going to connect with brothers and sisters who are on the ground wherever we are covering. Yeah. And I'm doing my best at the moment to get brothers and sisters who are on the ground in IET as well. Yeah, so do stay tuned. That will come. But definitely in the next few weeks, we'll have somebody who's on the ground in Azania, South Africa, to bring you some proper analysis. Bala is in the building, and Bala is asking, Got Kush TV, have you already discussed the UK government plans for national service? So look, for those who are unaware of what he's referring to, it's similar, although a little less aggressive than what the US government has just done. But basically, back in the day, the UK government used to have national service, which required all of the young men to spend some time in the military or doing some adjacent kind of work. They've broadened it out so you can do some level of community service. You can do police work, I think it is, and a few other different things. But where they generally direct national service to is being a part of the British Armed Forces. All other national service as a part of the Conservative plan is non-paid. I believe the only paid national service is in the military, in the British Armed Forces. Now, having said that, this is a proposal of the Conservative government that is now in power, and they are unlikely to be in power in just about a couple weeks time. So it's yet to be seen whether the Labour government, which is more or less guaranteed to be in power after the 4th of July, interestingly enough, this year, actually continues or implements that proposal. As it stands right now, they are attacking it, quite significantly. But it wouldn't be the first time. For example, in 1996, the Labour, which was then the opposition party, was attacking the growth of the private prison industry in the UK. When they came into power the following year, they announced that all prisons that are going to be newly built are going to be built under private ownership, right? So yeah, how the thing go. As Malcolm X said, two wings of the same plane. All right, let's go on to Imhotep on behalf of Joe Anili says, my maternal roots are in South Carolina, Charleston, and Abbeville, Anderson. I found a labor contract from my great-grandmother and her 10-year-old daughter. Can you imagine? That's a good point, though, Mansa Foday, that the sharecropping system wasn't exclusive to adults.
Not at all.
Yeah, utilize a whole heap of child labor.
The whole family.
Whole family, brothers and sisters. Yeah. And coming back to the point that I was making earlier about the Gilded Age, and this was the embedding of the American capitalism, right, in a significant way. A few decades later, people began to campaign against child labor. And these same corporations that were enriching themselves began to consider a ban on child labor and infringement of their free market rights. I'm telling you, these people are wicked. Yeah, but it's a very
Wow.
important point. Thank you, Joe Neely, for highlighting the fact that the sharecropping system utilizes a lot of child labor. Go ahead, Mansa Foday.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I found several for my ancestors as well. Finding these labor contracts is like, oh man, heartbreaking when you actually find them. You're like, man, they got them, you know. But when you got the contract, it's like, man, you know, this is really part of my heritage. It's part of my legacy.
Yes, sir.
You understand?
Yes, sir.
And it wakes you up to it because you're like, man, you know. And so I want to say to what's the name? Joanne?
Joanne Neely, yeah, Joanne Neely. It looks like.
Okay,
Yeah.
Joanne Neely. Absolutely.
Or Joy Neely. Yeah, I'm not sure which one it is, but yeah.
Okay, so there's one important thing that during our discussion, Shakara, we kind of swept over.
Yes, sir.
And this comment brings it right back to it. These labor contracts would not have been an issue. Wouldn't even been a big thing had they done the right thing. And what I mean by that is that when Sherman was in Savannah meeting with those 20 Gullah Geechee leaders, after that question, that back and forth between them and Fraser, a couple days later, Sherman does another special order. Special order number 15. Right? That order turned over 40 acres and a mule
to each of them. No, go ahead.
To all of the Africans in the area from like Charleston all the way down to South Georgia along the coast. Basically the heartland of what they call the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor today. All the Sea Islands and there. So they turned that land over to the Freedmen. Later on, a couple of years later, after Lincoln was killed, a couple months later, and then the next president came and reneged and took all that land back. So it's a land question at the center of us being landless in the first place. So sharecropping and these labor contracts, because where will we live at? How will we take care of ourselves? Where will we go? It's very important to also highlight that our ancestors, in a very short period of time, became literate. In a very short period of time, because the emphasis on education and emphasis on land within our own community, we fought this back. It wasn't just accepted, but you know, it wasn't a fist fight.
Yes, sir.
It was an institutional fight. You understand? And so it was a cultural fight. And you know, I love my ancestors, man. They did the best that they could.
Absolutely.
With these kind of, you know, fraudulent contracts that did nothing but put them back into slavery.
Absolutely. I'm always, the more you learn about the ancestors, the more you seek to understand them and the decisions that they made before you judge them, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like I'm just very much aware of the difficulties of making choices in those kinds of circumstances. That goes to my ancestors on plantations. It goes to our ancestors who were in the sharecropping environment. It goes to our ancestors who were leaders of nations at the beginning of the so-called independence era. This is very difficult, you know, circumstances in which to make decisions. Yeah. Set Imhotep is reposting Uwa Abantum's post, which says Trinidad and Tobago has a Gullah Geechee connection. Yeah, true. Through the actually, I know about the Americans. I wasn't sure the extent to which they were Gullah Geechee. Although I'd imagine that's entirely possible.
They are. They actually, you know, one of the things that the Americans did was they brought hill rice cultivation to Trinidad from America. They're the ones who brought the hill rice culture there.
Yes,
and even their dialect of the Americans is very close to Gullah Geechee. It's almost identical.
Yes, sir. No, yeah, but to be fair, I mean, if you heard a Gullah Geechee person speaking and you didn't know better, you would assume they're from the Caribbean. Yeah, like if you are from the Caribbean, you would assume that the person who's speaking to you is also from the Caribbean. Go ahead.
You know, you asked earlier the importance of South Carolina.
Yes,
South
sir.
Carolina was established from Europeans and Africans who were first established in Barbados. That culture, even that system of enslavement, came with the mainland. And that's what made South Carolina different from the other states. That they came already with a custom Caribbean style slave system and culture. Not only that, but remember, South Carolina, and particularly the Gullah Geechee people, we are largely comprised of those who came from either Africa directly or from the Caribbean. We came from both ways. We have a very strong connection to both sides. Not only that, but I'm glad that this person is saying this, because on top of Trinidad and Tobago, you'll find that after the American Revolution, many Africans were taken into the Caribbean. The largest group ended up in Jamaica, Kingston. And then you have this ongoing back and forth. Every time the Europeans would have a war, they would grab Africans from America and scatter them to the other colonies. This is why the diaspora wars and the whole Caribbean versus America FBA ADOS thing is just retarded.
Stupid. It's just dumb. It's just dumb. Especially like you mentioned South Carolina rice. So on, right. And so when you understand the extent to which that rice was very tied into the economy in the Caribbean, because it was a lot of the Caribbean islands who were importing that rice. Well, I should say the colonizers in the Caribbean islands who were importing that rice from the colonizers who were in what became known as the United States of America. Like it's that. Then you have the fact that there are Europeans who live in the United States who own plantations in Jamaica and Antigua, right? You know what I'm saying? Right? You know what I'm saying? Like this system of enslavement is very, very intertwined as far as the Europeans who were engaging in it are. Then that's to say nothing of the Louisiana Purchase and the extent to which Napoleon made that sell because of the beating that he took in Haiti. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, so effectively, that there's a whole section of the United States of America that as it is today, that would have been under French control had it not been for that loss. Yeah, so they were all very, very, tied. The Europeans were very, very tied into each other. The Africans were very, very connected and tied into each other, brothers and sisters. And we're gonna get Mansa Foday back very shortly. I got a couple more comments in the chat, and then we're gonna wrap up the things. We've been there for quite some time now. Three more comments, Mansa Foday. Continue. Emancipation should be transferred to an African empire, i.e., Haiti, Abyssinia, Ethiopia, Mali, Sahel. It's a slow walk to freedom. Okay. And then more. We call it Moruga Hill rice in Trinidad. Okay. And I find Gullah Geechee sounds just like a Caribbean accent for sure. Yeah, it's like it had things gone differently, in the United States of America. Like, because remember, most Africans in America have roots in the South. Yeah, just what I'm saying. So even the changes in dialect and language, a lot of that is due to migration to the North, right? Just what I'm saying. So even if outside of if you check what they call Ebonics, the deeper the Ebonics becomes, just like if you're in the Caribbean, the deeper the patois goes is when you're in the bush and the country, and the more we start to sound like each other. Yeah, it just is what it is. Yeah, the more we start to sound like each other. All right. Let me see. Last comment. It's just a broader on the rice issue. Moruga is where the American companies are. So yeah, give thanks. All right, that's that, brothers and sisters. Sorry. Okay, one more question. This is actually an interesting question. What do you know about the? Sorry, not that question. He's asking about the Republic of New Africa. Now I was in Atlanta recently, and I was with some old Republic of New Africa activists, the New African People's Organization activists. Yeah, but it's an interesting question. I don't know how deeply you want to go into it, Mansa Foday, but feel free to answer the question.
I'm fully aware of the Republic of New Africa. In terms of, provisional government
Yes,
for
sir.
us, for, the descendants of those who were enslaved in the United States, who still don't have a national territory, don't have a national status in the world outside of being domestically colonized by the United States. Of course, I'm very aware of the Republic of New Africa. I've always been a supporter of the concept of the ideal. And when you look deeply, you realize that that's really what we are. We really are a Republic of New Africa in the United States. But the ideal has grown since the 60s because you have so many more elements there with us. You have new Africans now. We were the new Africans. Now you got new Africans. And we got to figure out what to do with that as well. How do we include and grow from what we were in the 60s to what we need to be now in the 21st century, in terms of, state building, statehood, having representative. Marcus Mosiah Garvey, one of the reasons why he launched the movement, the UNIACL, was because he began to ask himself questions about our African leadership. Where are our leaders? Where are our institutions? Where are, And so the Republic of New Africa, definitely, I believe in theory, has always existed. And since the 60s, in a more formal political way. And in the 21st century, I'm excited to see what exactly the Republic of New Africa will become, because the way America is going, man.
Yeah, serious point. And that leads me to a question that I think is a good one to end our show on today, Mansa Foday, because I'm seeing that there's a drive within the Western world. We're experiencing it here in the UK. I see it's always been the case with French-speaking African nations and Africans in France and the US as well. Yeah, to put out a narrative that encourages us to tie our allegiance to the colonizer nation. Yeah. And so the story, for example, of Juneteenth, yeah, and all the history that you've been, the Civil War becomes, how great is America? You know what I'm saying? And how wonderful was the contribution of Black people to America, and the rejection of the kind of freedom and self-determination that was evident in what our ancestors were dealing with. They do the same to us in the UK, whereby, they're willing now. Whereas the stories of those of our ancestors who fought in the British Armed Forces, was often sidelined and marginalized and hidden. Now they're exposing the stories and putting, our ancestors on TV and in museums and so on and so forth. But they do it in order to seduce us into, yes, we are British too, and this is, we're just as British as the white man, and we fought for this country, and so therefore, what I'm saying, and all these things, right? That narrative is designed to secure our allegiance, yeah, to Britain. And and I have nothing against the land, yeah, which is called the United Kingdom of Great Britain, but that's not the same thing to me as the United Kingdom of Great Britain, the state, right? What I'm saying? Just like I have nothing against North America and South America, but that's very different to the United States of America. Absolutely. So it's nothing to do with the land as far as they're concerned. They want your allegiance to the state, yeah. So I want just your opinion, Mansa Foday, in terms of our observers of our history, our ancestors, and the celebrations that we observe annually, yeah, that relate to that history. How should we engage in those celebrations? How should we honor our ancestors in ways that do justice to us and the ultimate goal from a Pan-African, universal African nationalist perspective of freedom and independence, sovereignty, and those kinds of things?
That's a great question, man. I think we have to outdo anyone else. I think it becomes a question of the enemy attempting to co-opt our history and our culture and use it and weaponize it against the mentality of our people. So many people right now are prepared for Juneteenth and been doing things all weekend, but they don't really know what they're doing it for. You understand? So I think that one of the things is that we have to keep a lot more in house.
Right.
There's a lot more. There's a lot more unknown histories, rebellions, and analysis that needs to be made. But not all the time should we make it known that we actually know what we know. We should keep some things quiet. We should keep some things private.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Especially when we're talking about commemorations. Like I was thinking, like, what would I really like to do? I would like to be in Beaufort. I would like to be in the same place at the Bricks Church where, you know, Delaney was giving the speech and, you know, pour libations there, you know. I think that the way that we commemorate has to be more of a journey. It has to have more significance than just a day of public recognition. I think the private and personal aspect of this redemption has to be real. We need to identify the places that are sacred to us. We need to say this place is very, very special to us because this happened here. And for that reason, we're going to come here on this day every year and quietly do this. You know, we need to have the bulk of what we're commemorating unknown to the enemy. And for those aspects that are public, those aspects that we can't put back under wraps, we need to dominate them.
Yes,
if
sir.
Juneteenth is going to be Juneteenth, we should dominate it. We should dominate it. We should do as much as we can with it. And you know, that's how. Look at Kwanzaa, for instance. There's so much that we can do with Kwanzaa. You know, and in another sense, I also believe that we're cut off from the local histories of our people.
Right.
There's a lot happening right there where you are in the UK.
Yes,
that
sir.
maybe you're aware of, and those in your community are aware of because it's local history.
Yes,
but
sir.
I would never be aware of. So
Yes,
I
sir.
think that
Yes, sir.
embark on one, genealogy. Study your family, know your history, know your ancestors, know what they was a part of, and do, you know, memorialize them. We have to create our own saints. We have to create our own martyrs, right? And so I think we need to really be inspired by the African tradition and how we commemorate. We can't do it the way like they do Easter or they do 4th of July just because they're nationalizing it. We can't let them control how we do Juneteenth or how we do any of our commemorations for our ancestors in this context. So even though they recognize it, we can't let them control it. We can't let them control the narrative. We can't let them control how we commemorate, how we maintain that connection and reconnection with ours. That can't be interfered with. And so I believe that our spiritualists, those who are religious leaders and our spiritual leaders who, you know, uphold the moral standards in the community, they need to be in the forefront of this as well. Not just the political activists and the historians, but I believe that we need some cultural and some moral guidance in how we restore our culture, because culture is continuous. It's always going to continue to change and grow. But there's certain aspects that has been lost to us, and as we recover it, as we dig up these lost pages of our history, some of it, again, we have to tuck it, keep it in house, bring our moralists up to it, keep the politicians and the other ones away. Politicians are always moving politically, trying to get a gain.
Yes.
And also believe that there has to be emphasis on reinforcement 365 around the calendar. We have to have a way where we are able to have a system of commemoration that can be presented to each household. Each household can have a way that they're in sync with the commemorations, as opposed to only those who are in the movement know that this is to be commemorated on this day. I see a lot of brothers and sisters doing a lot of children books. A lot of people are writing books and literature for the young, for the babies.
Yes.
I think that is the battlefield. I think that is the front lines. If we're able to instill this concept that I'm telling you now into those youngins, as they experience Juneteenth, they'll be having the experience that ultimately is going to create new ideals and new energy. By the time they're 18, 19, 20 parents, it'll be a tradition. They'll be keeping the tradition that they were taught. So we have to engineer. Sir. We have to culturally engineer the next generation. But that's what I think, bro. That's what I think.
Thank you very much, Mansa Foday. Third Assistant President General of the UNIA ACL RC 2020, leading the charge to organize the region of West Africa, brothers and sisters, within the context of the UNIA ACL RC 2020. No doubt, not the first, then certainly won't be the last. So go ahead.
Africa.
Yeah, you're correct, my brother. You're correct. And some good work is taking place, and we're going to be profiling that good work in relation to the resurgence of the UNIA ACRC 2020 on the African continent in the coming weeks, months, and years, brothers and sisters. And yeah, you know, Chief Foday, whenever you want this platform, it's yours. All you got to do is get in touch, and we'll arrange something. Yeah, Kimbunga Media is your platform. And so anytime you make the call, yeah, it's yours to come true, my brother, because the people them say them want and see more of you. So we'll make it happen. All right. So give thanks, Mansa, for elucidating this history for us, and we'll see you again soon. Feel free to let yourself out as I close the show. Give him thanks, my brother. Oh, and let me salute. I can't have you here and not salute Mama Kenya Mansa, you know what I'm saying? You know, president of the Freetown Division of the UNIA ACL RC 2020, you know, and yeah, no doubt we're gonna get Mama Kenya back on the platform very, very soon. All right, give him thanks, blessings, family, blessings. Have a good evening. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters. Mansa Foday is in the building. You don't know, and we've just broken down a lot of history stemming from an essay that he wrote entitled "Martin's Rebellion: A Story of Black Resistance in the Union Army." Martin's Rebellion, a story of Black resistance in the Union Army. You will find that article linked in the description to this video, and you will also find it in the chat, brothers and sisters. I encourage you to read it. Very fascinating history, and many times, yeah, as I've said already, they tell our history, they tell the story of our ancestors in ways that lead to their hypervalorization, their aggrandizement as far as the United States of America is concerned. So it's like all our ancestors wanted to do was become citizens of the United States of America, and that's not really the full story, brothers and sisters. And so we give thanks for Mansa Foday for coming through, you know, and shining a light on that history. Tomorrow, you have to tune in, because we're going to be joined by brother Jafrique Aiti, as we engage. We stand with Aiti. Part 5, brothers and sisters. We stand with Haiti, and there'll be more Haiti content before the month is over, so do stay tuned. But tomorrow, from 8 p.m. BST, British Summertime, that's UK time, and 3 p.m. EST, we are going to be joined by our brother Jafrique Haiti. For those who were here when we hosted our ambassador, David Commichon from CARICOM, more specifically Barbados, brother Jafrique Haiti, alongside my father, brother Leader Mbandaka, was among those who joined us to analyze the statements of the ambassador, brothers and sisters. And so you would have seen him before if you joined us for that show. Well, he's going to have this show, you know, as our only guest, to break down the recent developments in Haiti as it relates to the supposed support mission that has been orchestrated by the United States of America. There's been a meeting this week along with the Caribbean Development Bank in Canada in relation to you know, the economics of Haiti and what's going to be done there. Very, very interesting meeting. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. We'll also be talking about the elections of a provisional government in Haiti. We're going to be talking about all of these things tomorrow, brothers and sisters. And so I tell you, say, well, now come out for the Haiti thing. We are stay upon it. And so tomorrow, once again, brothers and sisters, we stand with Haiti, part 5. Our special guest is brother Jafrique Haiti. And we are beginning at 8 p.m. UK time, 3 p.m. EST. We encourage you to join us, brothers and sisters. Sending a special shout out to all brothers and sisters today who joined us from the United States of America. We appreciate you because that specific history was the primary subject of our conversation today. Thank you for joining us. If you are new to Got Kush TV, please subscribe to Got Kush TV if you are not subscribed to Got Kush TV, brothers and sisters. And as some of you may know, we are in the process between now and the 17th of Messiah, August, transitioning from Got Kush TV to Kimbunga Media, brothers and sisters. And so in line with that, many things are in the pipeline. And so in order to stay in tune with everything, subscribe to us on all of the social media from now, and all of the names will be starting to change very soon, and you'll get updates in terms of our progress, our development, what's coming in terms of new shows, and so on, brothers and sisters. We thank all those who have supported us thus far, and if you are so moved, do join our Patreon. We're going to be doing a recommended reading for our Patreons only, and based upon a request that was made during the Scientific Garveyism Q&A. If you have not watched Scientific Garveyism, the presentation, go and check it out, and you can also check out the Q&A discussion that happened the following day afterwards. But during the conversation, it was asked of me to do a review of books on Papa Garvey and the UNIAACL. And so I'm going to be doing that from, it's like from, I say next month, all the way through Messiah. I'm going to try and do one a week or one every other week. But then I'm going to extend it out. So I'm going to be doing books, just general reading that is important for us as African people to engage in. And so, we'll be doing that for our Patreon community specifically. So I will recommend the book, do some readings from it, why it's important, maybe explain some of the dynamics behind its publishing. That's going to be a Patreon only content. So if you want to get that Patreon only content beginning next month in July, check out the Patreon right now and become a member. It doesn't matter how much you give. Doesn't matter how much you give, you'll be able to receive that content and other exclusive content coming in the months and the years, brothers and sisters. We give thanks for Mansa Foday for being our special guest this evening once again. And with that, we say greetings and blessings and honor to all our brothers and sisters on the other side of the ocean who will be engaged in Juneteenth celebrations tomorrow and in the weekend, and who have already been involved in Juneteenth celebrations and observances in the previous weekend. We hope your celebrations are fruitful and productive, and that the real and true history of our people is infused into your celebratory efforts, brothers and sisters. And just so you know, we, as your brothers and sisters around the African diaspora, stand with you in the celebration and the honoring of our ancestors who were enslaved and fought and resisted within the bounds of the United States of America. And with that, we say Tenda Mwadi, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai Muzimu Mokuro, we give praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodi, African power and African liberation for all African people. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.
Transition. New era, new transition. Greetings, this is Shakara, and it's been an honor serving you as director of Got Kush TV. Over the past few years, we've brought you the pilot of the Black Root Economic Show, many seasons of Wordsmith, The Insight, and the ever-popular Decipher. We have covered community events and even hosted a few of our own, including Blacktricity, as a part of the official Ghana Beyond the Return roster. We also kept you company throughout lockdown with the Quarantine Convo. After a brief hiatus, we came back with our regular weekly interactive live show, Zivanai, keeping you up to date with current events around the Black world, from UK to Senegal to Haiti and beyond. It is our aim to continue to develop as a premier Black media institution, and for that reason, we have a special announcement. Introducing Kimbunga Media. Between the 10th of June and the 17th of Mosiah, August, we will be transitioning to a new name and institution, Kimbunga Media. In the beautiful Kiswahili language, Kimbunga means whirlwind.
Look for me in a whirlwind or a storm. Look for me all around you. For with God's grace, I shall come back with countless millions of black men and women who have died in America, those who have died in the West Indies, and those who have died in Africa, to aid you in the fight for liberty, freedom, and life.
Our name symbolizes our aim to take the media landscape by storm, developing high quality, impactful, geopolitical and cultural content aimed at empowering African people, bringing knowledge, information, inspiration and analysis from an unapologetically Pan-African, universal African nationalist and African-centered perspective. So, what can you expect? We are gradually developing a full spectrum of flagship shows and presenters, but in the immediate right here now, over the next couple of years, we have two major aims in bringing you our flagship shows. One, the return of Kush Communiversity, bringing you high-level scholarship in all areas of people activity, featuring luminaries from across the black world. And two, the production of the full first season of the new and improved Ujamaa Black Group Economic Show. While we encourage you to develop and support black businesses, this show aims to raise our awareness of the political economy of today's world and popularize new solution paradigms in political economy among African people. Alongside all this, we will continue to bring you Zivanai, Jaliba, the Afrocentric perspective, All Eyes on Africa, Ghana, Democracy Under Fire, the Revolutionary Minds team with that artistic, ancestral energy, and as things grow and develop, there'll be plenty more. We also have plans to host live events and film screenings, so stay tuned for more information on that. So what can you do? Continue to support us by watching, liking, sharing and commenting on our content. Be sure to follow us on all social media, and if you are so moved, join our Patreon community. We'll be sharing flagship shows exclusively with our Patreon community before general release and granting you discounts to events and future screenings. Right now, if you become a Patreon, you will have access to the pilot for the Black Group Economic Show and all installments of last year's Black History Month series, Sankofa, The Future of Black History. At some point, we'll be engaging in community crowdfunding towards the production of the new and improved Ujamaa Black Group Economic Show, complete with offerings and perks for those who choose to invest in us. Look out for the launch, and we thank you in advance for your support. Any questions, feel free to hit us up in the comment section and we'll be sure to address. We look forward to you joining us for this new phase of our development. Stay tuned as we bring you Kimbunga Media.
Black people, we've got to fight. Jean Petro, you see us. Oguo, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, Black people, we've got to fight. Zumbi, you see us. Oh, whoa, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, Black people, we've got to fight. Yes, until why you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Book mine, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh,
we have to have the courage to construct our own reality. And that's what Garvey was talking about. Because he said he looked around, he didn't see what he thought should be there, and so what did he do? He didn't get depressed about it. He didn't get defeated about it. He said, I'm gonna build the government that we need to have. Ooh, where do you get that kind of boldness from? So we gotta go all the way back to Garvey, who said he would come again. He said he would be here with us, no matter how long it took. And I'm telling you that the way he comes back is in our work. Not honoring him in words, pomp and all of that stuff, but honoring him through doing what he did. How many of us have the courage to do that? The man took on the world for us and in our name. And then we come to Foday. And in this presentation of the paradigm, I'm going to make this like what it is we want to reach. So Foday is translated clear word in Dogana language. And I use it to mean that here we gain understanding. This is sight with understanding. And it is seeing beyond what just we think we see with this physical thing. It's seeing beyond that. And so we gain vision, because that's what vision is. With vision, you've got to be able to use the imagination informed by the African spirit. And Brother Amos, who I work very closely with, was a good friend of mine. He taught me, and he would talk about imagination. Image a nation. Do you see? But that's got to be part of vision. To be a visionary, you got to see beyond this box here. You got to see beyond the ma'afa. You got to see what is it that our people rightfully should have, and that's what Garvey did. Garvey had a vision.